So the women would sneak a lot of the bullets in. And what they would do is they would get on the train, they go into Charleston to Union headquarters and pick up bullets, right? And then they would take the bullets and put them in their underwear. Put them either in their bras or in their panties, right. Stick them in their undergarments. And because they knew that the mine guards wouldn't touch them right there whenever they got off the trains.
Yeah.
And so that's how they would smuggle a lot of bullets in.
Man, this is amazing. Welcome to Creepalachia. Today, we're diving deep into history, and I couldn't be more excited than to introduce our next guest, Chuck Keeney. Thank you for joining us in the studios.
Yeah, glad to be here, JD.
Yeah, so we're going to do all things Mine Wars, Blair Mountain, Matewan. You are actually related, right, to a legend of the Mine Wars. So kind of give people your background.
Yeah, okay. So my name's Chuck Keeney. I'm a historian. I'm a history professor. I got my master's at Marshall, my doctorate at WVU. So I've been to both of the big state schools, right? And I teach at Southern, a community college in Logan. I also teach at the University of Charleston. And I also do one class a year for West Virginia Wesleyan, but my specialization is Appalachian history and labor history in modern America and modern Europe. And so, but my background is I'm the great grandson of Frank Keeney, who was the president of the United Mine Workers in West Virginia from 1917 to 1924, and was a key figure in the mine wars, particularly the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strike, and later on the second half, which took place, Matewan, the Battle of Blair Mountain, all that. And he was charged with treason and murder and conspiracy to commit murder after the Battle of Blair Mountain. Later started his own union, the West Virginia Mine Workers, during the Great Depression. We can talk about that a little bit later on.
Oh, yeah.
And then I also, so that's my background, or like my family background related to the mine wars. And I started to get involved with a group called Friends of Blair Mountain back in 2010, which was a group created to preserve the Blair Mountain battlefield, as at the time it was under threat from mountaintop removal. So we waged and I became president of that group. And we waged an 8-year battle against the coal companies to preserve the battlefield, which we won.
Heck yeah.
And in the process of all that, we ended up creating also the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum, which is a separate organization from Friends of Blair Mountain, but it's with a lot of the same people. And so we helped create the Mine Wars Museum, and I founded the journal with the museum. That we have a journal that goes out every 6 months or so to our members, and I started that up and played a role in writing all the things that were on the walls in the museum. And we worked together, right? Last year on one of our redesigns of our Battle of Matewan exhibit. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I guess we can get into the details as we go here.
Oh yeah. So and like you mentioned, you did a walking tour. Took people through Matewan and told the history, which was super awesome. I've done a couple 90-second videos here recently. I did one on the flood wall and one on the Matewan massacre, but this is going to be that sweaty version.
Yes.
So how do we start? So take me back to the early 1900s. Where do you think we should start first to kind of set up the mine wars?
Well, I would actually go back a little bit earlier and go back to the 1880s, where I would kind of go back to.
Let's do it.
And I got my St. Patty's Day stuff. I know we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day, but we're the day before the Ides of March, right? And that was Frank Keeney's birthday. He was born on March the 15th, 1882. And that same year that he was born along Cabin Creek in West Virginia was the same year that Thomas Edison first introduced the coal-fired power plant. And everybody knows that Edison invented the light bulb, right? But a lot of people don't realize that he also invented the coal-fired power plant and the electric grid that we still use today. And the first coal-fired power plant debuted in Manhattan. The first coal-fired coal-fired power plant in the world. Debuted in Manhattan, 1882. And with this, suddenly coal was now what's going to power the American cities. So now there's a much bigger demand. There was already a growing demand for coal because of steel, right? And people heated it in their homes and people used it in the railroads, but now it's going to be used for electrical generation. And so this led to a coal boom in West Virginia as they begin to find the enormous coal seams that are available there. And so that's a land grab starts to take place from railroad companies, steel companies like U.S. Steel, Andrew Carnegie's U.S. Steel, companies from Philadelphia, New York, London are coming in and trying to buy up land. My great-grandfather, who was born in 1882, the family had, a little over 2,000 acres of land along Cabin Creek. But before his father died before he turned 2, and very shortly after that, the family lost their land to the coal companies. Now, how do families lose their land to coal companies is one thing you might want to begin by discussing.
Sure.
Because one of the big problems with West Virginia, both then and now, is that a majority of the land in West Virginia is absentee owned, right? Even recent land studies have shown that there's a number of coal counties that have upwards of 70% of the land.
Still.
That's absentee owned. Well, how did that happen? Right. Well, it happened in the 1880s and 1890s. It started first, they would come in and try to buy up land. And a lot of times locals didn't want to sell. They wanted to keep their land. So they came up with a new thing called mineral rights and the broad form deed, which enabled them to buy the land beneath the feet of the people that lived there. They also had a number of other methods, one of which was after the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress couldn't pay all the Revolutionary soldiers. So one of the ways in which they tried to pay them was offering them land. And a lot of the land plots that they offered Revolutionary War veterans was out here in West Virginia. Well, a lot of veterans didn't claim those lands because they didn't want to come out here in the late 1700s. It was still pretty, it was way more wild than wonderful back then.
Right. A lot of mountains, no roads.
Right. No roads, no way in and out except the rivers. You still have the Shawnee in force in the area. So that was still a bit of an issue, even with a few years after the Revolutionary War. But anyway, so a lot of these land deeds went unclaimed. Okay. So you fast forward 75 years and West Virginia becomes a state. Well, those land deeds were all made in Richmond, okay? Well, obviously, new land deeds are made out for the new state. What a lot of coal companies and land companies and railroad companies did is they went back to Richmond and bought these original Revolutionary War deeds, and then they would go to court over local families and say, we have the original deeds, and we bought the original deeds, and our deeds are valid, and your deeds aren't. And locals would often win, like in the local battles, but then the companies bought out the higher courts, and so they would just appeal to the higher courts, and families just either couldn't support the court costs, or they would be overruled by judges that had been kind of bought out and bribed, and so families begin losing their lands to coal companies. All the leaders of the mine wars, the Frank Keeney, Fred Mooney, Bill Blizzard, Bill Petrie, and even the Hatfields, all of them lost land to these big absentee coal companies. And they were the leaders. That's a really important point because they came from pioneer families that had been there for about a century, and they all lost their land to the coal companies. And that's a big motivating factor, aside from all the other things that we'll get into.
Sure.
So first of all, they get the land, right? And then they begin establishing this company town system because they want to bring in workforces. And so they build up towns wherever the coal seams are. And so you have the company town system that's very famous. Everybody knows the I owe my soul to the company store, right? And so we all know, or at least I don't know how much your viewers would know, but a lot of people from West Virginia, if you're particularly from the southern part of the state, you're familiar with the company town system or the coal company houses. You know, you've seen a lot of old coal company houses, coal company stores where they owned everything. They owned the houses, they owned the stores, and the store was like your early 20th century Walmart, right? It was your one-stop shopping. That's where you went. And so you bought everything at the company store, from your groceries to your clothes to even your mining equipment. And so they import a lot of workers. So you have about 45% are native whites. You have about 20% are black. And the rest are immigrants that they end up bringing into these coal camps. Big, diverse group that gets brought into these little areas. And you know how the geography is here, where we just kind of put towns wherever there's wide spots, right, next to a creek. And so these towns are all scrunched together. So you have all these different groups living right close together. And they're all kind of enduring the same kind of really rough system that's kind of cheating them out of their money. They get their job. They're told that they have to buy their equipment on the first day. Like they can't, they don't get their equipment provided. So they got to buy their pick, their dynamite, their gunpowder, their canary, their little canary cage.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the canary was used to tell them when carbon monoxide was entering the mine.
Yes. Yeah. When the canary falls over, it's time to run.
Yep.
Rats were also a really good indicator too. My understanding is in those early mines, whenever you saw rats running by you, that was also another rough sign. But it was mostly the canaries were most sensitive to those gases, and so whenever they started to get really agitated and everything, that's when you would know. You had to buy all that yourself. A lot of times you didn't have that cash to buy it, so you're in debt. Right? You're in debt from day one. And a lot of times people don't make enough money because you have to spend all your money on, on credit at the company store.
Yeah. There was no tax write-offs for equipment you purchased back then. It was just like, we'll loan it to you and then charge you overpriced.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's a great old movie. It came out, I believe, in the 70s called The Molly Maguires with Sean Connery and Richard Harris. And it's about a coal miners kind of revolt in Western Pennsylvania that took place in the 1870s. They were Irish coal miners. They ended up all getting hanged. But anyway, there's a great sequence in it where it goes through the whole day of the life of a miner. And then it shows them at the end of the week while they're all waiting to see how much money that they earned, and they're detracting everything from the company stores.
Oh, wow.
And so
what's the movie called?
The Molly Maguires.
The Molly Maguires. I'm gonna look that up while you're telling us about it.
And so you have this really long line, and you have the guy would get to the front of the line, and then you say, okay, you earned 20 some dollars this week, but let's take off this for your groceries, this for this. And they go down the checklist, and okay, you've got 28 cents left. Here's your payment. And of course they give you that in script, right? Company money. And some of the script, the company money that they gave people was even specified for specific things. One of my favorite pieces of script we have at the Mine Wars Museum is a piece that just says good for one loaf of bread.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize this. I made a post telling people about script, and there's so many people don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
So can you kind of explain how it was a monetary system?
Yeah. So each company would make their own money, make their own coinage, and this is what they would pay out to the miners. And the company script, people often say script. It's not a script. It's script that you would get at the company store. And actually, if you go to the Mine Wars Museum website and look at one of our online exhibits, you can find that piece of script, good for one loaf of bread. It says, and it was a Logan County. And each company made their own script so that you couldn't go to another company's store and buy it, so that they didn't have to compete against one another. And so you're not even getting paid in American money. When they first went on strike on Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, that's one of their strike demands, was to be paid in American money.
Ain't that crazy?
Yeah.
We still forget about that today. Like, people don't even realize.
Yeah.
When you DoorDash your chicken nuggets, like used to, people had to fight to get paid actual money.
Actual money.
Yeah.
Which is a crazy kind of system. That first big strike, the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strike, they didn't ask for, among the strike demands, they didn't ask for a raise. They didn't ask for more money. They just asked for money.
Sure.
Just to be paid in regular American money. They had a number of other demands that had to do with how they were paid, but they didn't ask specifically for a raise.
Right.
They wanted to be treated fairly.
Yep.
Which is a whole different ballgame. So they get under this system. You also have to talk about how dangerous it was to work in the mines back then. It's obviously not nearly as dangerous as what it used to be. But of course, before it was mechanized And before there were any real safety regulations or any real regulatory agencies, there wasn't something like MSHA. There wasn't a Coal Miners Health and Safety Act, that was passed much, much later on. So coal miners had a really, really dangerous job. They would go in, they would pick out a little wedge down at the bottom of the coal seam, and they would drill the hole, by hand with these breast augers. We have one of those at the museum. They're huge, huge tools. And heavy. Just back. You can just feel the tools and just think about being down there for 8-9 hours, thinking how backbreaking that would be. And then you blow it. You put your dynamite in and you blow up your little coal seam, and then you shovel it yourself, right? Well, they had all kinds of accidents early on, explosions. So the biggest one was the Monongah blast of 1907 that killed at least 361. We have a memorial to that in the museum too.
Yep.
That's just we had all these check tags. And I should mention what a check tag is too.
Yeah, for sure. I'll bring this up as a visual while you're talking about it.
Yeah, so it's you would load up your car full of coal, right? And then you would put a check tag. Each miner had their own check tag with a number designated for each miner, right?
Right.
And so you would put your check tag with your load of coal and then push it on up, and maybe a mule would take it up and it would go up to the front. There it is. There's the check tags. And what would happen is then they would know that was your coal because you're paid by the ton and you're not paid by the hour, right? Mm. So because you're paid by the ton, it's how much you can dig. And so your check tags would basically, ensure that your coal was counted for you because you wouldn't be there when they weighed it oftentimes. And when we first opened up the museum, we just had all these miners and their families come in. Do you want some check tags? We have check tags. So we had piles and piles of check tags that people had given us. And when we were revamping the museum, because we had an original location and we moved to a new location over the pandemic across the street. And Sean Slifer, our exhibit designer, and I were sitting there in the floor with all these check tags, all these piles of check tags, on the floor. And we're like, what are we going to do with all this? And he wanted to do something to memorialize the Monongah blast. And I was like, hey, why don't we take one of these for each person? And so we've got 361 of them up on the wall to represent a different person that we know died in that blast alone.
Wow. Yeah. And I know people have walked in and they didn't realize, like, is this the total amount of miners that's died, period? And like, no, that's one blast.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's very overwhelming.
And that's just the ones that were reported. You had a lot of kids working in the mines too. You didn't have really any child safety protection laws at this. And you had kids. My great-grandfather went in as soon as he finished the 6th grade.
Wow.
Went into work in the mines to help support his family. And you go in at 8 years. Usually you worked as what they called a trap boy, opening up doors in different sections to let the mules go through with their loads of coal. He nearly got killed his first year in there as a trap boy. There was a partial collapse of one of the ceilings, and the mule started pressing him up against the wall and was like about to crush him.
Wow.
And he bit the mule's ear off in order to get the mule off of him.
Jeez. How old was he?
He just finished the 6th grade, so he must have been about 12.
That's crazy.
11 or 12, somewhere around there, when that took place.
Let's see, kids in coal.
Yeah, my grandmother always said that was the embodiment of who Frank Keeney was as a person. He was more stubborn than a mule, and that proved it right there.
Right.
So I'll say, if you start working, you only get to the 6th grade, right? And then you start working in the mines, that's all you know then for your life, and it really cuts back on your opportunities later on, wow. Right? So you have, and to sum it up with the dangers of the mines, between 1880 and 1920, West Virginia coal miners suffered a higher death rate than the American Expeditionary Force in World War I, meaning you could go to France and fight the Germans, and you had a better chance of making it out than if you worked in a West Virginia coal mine.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
So, yeah. And miners, by the way, by the time you get to World War II, miners are exempt from the draft. They don't have to go. But a lot of miners did go, not so much out of patriotism, but they just felt they had a better chance of surviving.
It's like, get me out of here, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now, like, sixth graders are mad when their Roblox card fails. Yeah. I just like to compare the two constantly. Of like, we can't forget this stuff. You know? It seems like we do.
Of how hard people used to have it. I really try to impress this upon my students that you had the American War for Independence, right? And that gave us independence, but it didn't give us people freedom in the workforce. And they had to fight a whole nother war so that people could have a bit of freedom in the workforce, so that, they can get a 40-hour week, or they can get weekends off, and you can get paid vacations, and you can get workers' comp, and et cetera, all those things that we just assume we automatically should have. People had to fight and die so that you could have that. And I think that it's something that young people need to be aware of.
Oh yeah.
You don't just get that stuff handed to you.
And we still see instances today where companies will, file bankruptcy to try to keep people from getting pensions. And there's just different versions. Yeah, we're not, gunning up and headed for the mountains like we'll get into in a little bit. But at the same time, this stuff, that's what happens. When you get now, different corporations handle things differently. Right. There are good and bad corporations, but it's important. So, all right. So it's dangerous. We're putting kids in the mines. When did things start to when did people start to say, I've had enough? Okay. There are a few early attempts to unionize. So the United Mine Workers gets formed in 1890. And at first, the United Mine Workers is way more active in Illinois, Western Pennsylvania, Indiana. Surprisingly, there was coal mines in Indiana. You don't think of Indiana as a coal mining place, but they had a lot of coal mining in Illinois too, and even in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. Those were what's called the Central Bituminous Field. Okay, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. Bituminous, is that like a fancy word for coal?
Yeah, you have bituminous coal, and then you have anthracite coal.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay. Gotcha. Bituminous is called soft coal, and anthracite coal is harder to burn.
So the anthracite is the big money stuff. Is that correct?
It's more rare.
Okay.
And it's more like Eastern Pennsylvania. They had anthracite mines. And bituminous is just much easier. It's much more plentiful, and it's much easier to burn.
Gotcha.
So, and it's cheaper. So it becomes it really is by far and away what is the preference of burning coal, whether it's for thermal or metallurgical purposes.
Okay. So they use that to make steel too?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
All yes. Right. Yeah. And a lot of the coal from West Virginia is used to make steel. Almost all of it that's coming out of West Virginia now is used for steel production. Very little coal that's coming out of West Virginia right now is used for electricity.
I find that interesting. I think there's a lot of people that don't realize how that process is. Do you know can you kind of walk through the process of making steel from coal and why it's so...
Well, I'm not a huge expert in it, but you have to heat the iron and all the various components up to a certain level. And coal is one of the ways of doing that, is providing the heat to smelt all the different components together to make the steel.
Gotcha.
So it enables you to get things hot enough to make it. And I don't know all the specifics from, I guess you'll have to talk to a steel guy more.
That's fine. And so, it burns hotter than wood.
Yes.
We'll just say that. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So people are starting to unionize, which, for those who don't know, I was in the UMWA for 7.5 years. So I'm very pumped for this conversation.
Yeah.
What started to happen early on, like when it started to become a thing where workers were like, you know what, screw this.
Yeah.
They
had in the other states that I just mentioned to you, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, that Central Bituminous Field. The UMW had some success early on with a lot of coal miners really joining up. But coal companies in those states didn't have the same kind of power and control that they had in West Virginia. When union organizers began coming into West Virginia, they disappear. They or get roughed up and beat up and thrown out. And partly this is because you have close to 90%, somewhere between 80 and 90%, we don't know the exact numbers, but between 80 and 90% of all coal miners were living in a company town. Whereas in the other states, the biggest was Illinois, and it was only like 48% people living in a company town. So you have, and they have a lot of other industries in those states. So if workers don't like how they're being treated, they can just go to somewhere else. They can vote with their feet, go to another industry, work in the railroad or automobile industry, or one of these places. So they've got other options, and they don't, they're not living in a company town too. So they have more power than West Virginia workers. And so in West Virginia, you have to go to the company town, which is a little bit more isolated. And you've got mine guards. My goodness, I haven't even mentioned the mine guards that companies used to keep the union out and keep the miners under control. And aside from kids, the death in the mines, being screwed over at the company store and being screwed over monetarily, and not having any rights in the workplace, you have these guys, these private police forces that are there in the towns with their guns and their horses ready to crack skulls or beat up anybody, or in some cases kill and spy on people. They also spied on people. Now, the mine guards, can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure, yeah. Go into it. Like the Baldwin Felts, is that like where that comes in?
Yeah. Most of the mine guards came from a company out of Bluefield called the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. And that's like a coal country version of the Pinkertons. If you're watching a lot of old Westerns, you'll see the Pinkertons mentioned a lot. You'll watch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's the Pinkertons that are after them. And they were a private company that railroads often hired out to go after bank robbers or things like that. Later on, the Pinkertons get hired out by Andrew Carnegie to put down steelworker strikes. And then the companies found out, you can use these companies to put down strikes. And so the one in West Virginia that was predominant was the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. And so they hired out these Baldwin Felts detectives, and they did everything from patrol the streets, come in to break strikes, but they also did things like operate as spies. So they would come into town and pose as miners and get a job and work in the mines as a miner and just listen to people talk.
Right.
Listen to find out who's talking union, find out maybe who's talking about maybe socialism or something like that, and get those people fired. Or they would come in and work as a bartender at the saloon, right? That's how you find out stuff. Bartenders and barbers, they know all the gossip, right?
Right.
Because they hear everything.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
Right. And so the bartender can just sit there and just listen to the people talking and then make the reports. The papers from the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency are in Bluefield at the Eastern Regional Coal Archives, and I've gone through them.
Oh, wow.
And so I've seen all the letters. That they wrote out letters, and they would just sign them like operative number 12, operative number 16, and they would be reports on people in their town and what they're doing. And in Mingo County, where they have a lot of floods, they would, how they build a lot of the houses up on blocks. That enabled detectives to crawl under homes and listen to people. And that's what they did. If they were suspecting something, like at night, they would kind of crawl under the house and like try to listen and see what was going on. And they did other things like the Baldwin Felts detectives would be there when you were filling out your ballot on election day. And they would be telling you, this is where you put your mark here. You're going to vote for this guy.
Wow.
You're going to vote for that guy. So it's very much a rigged system.
Now So was literacy big amongst coal miners, or when they would go to vote, for instance, would they not be able to tell who they could vote for? Or is that
that's a really good question, and I really don't know the full literacy rates because they were coming in from so many different places.
Right.
But a lot of these coal guys, they obviously didn't have a lot of education. Frank Keeney only went to the 6th grade. I think Fred Mooney, who was kind of Frank Keeney's number 2 guy, was also not very well educated. So they educated themselves. They really put a lot of emphasis on self-education. Frank Keeney was an avid reader, and so was Mooney, and they tried to really educate themselves. In the museum, I have that I loaned to the museum is a book of poems that Frank Keeney had in the Paint Creek and Cabin Creek strike, and he kept it with him in his tent. This was passed down to me from my parents and then grandparents, and it's really cool. He's got like little marks in it, little passages underlined. But you wouldn't think of like a leader of coal miners to be sitting there with a book of poetry, right?
That's awesome.
Right. But it kind of goes against that stereotype. But you're right. A lot of them did, these weren't the most literate guys in the world. Most of them could at least read a little bit, but they weren't they weren't scholars by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure. And they also built that narrative on Appalachia as a whole of like, okay, these are all isolated people. They're not educated,
Yeah.
So that's kind of, they started building that narrative to hurt us even today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That hillbilly redneck stereotype is one way of saying they're standing in the way of progress. And them causing trouble in the mines or them causing trouble over here at one place or another, they're getting in the way of industrial progress. They're stopping the modernization of their home because they're so backward and uncivilized. It's not because they're being mistreated. It's not because, they're being screwed over every which way but one.
Yeah, they get a coin to say, this is the bread coin, and this one you can buy, other things.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. So, and you're talking about Baldwin Felts. I don't want to stray too far. So they started messing with people.
Right.
And you mentioned they go under the homes, they do different things. And is that kind of how Sid Hatfield gets brought into the whole conversation, or are there other things that occur before that?
There's quite a few things that happen before Sid Hatfield gets involved because that's post-World War I. But they start fighting back. And there's a couple of attempted strikes early on, the early 1900s, 1902. There's one in 1906 that they try out. But they don't have any, they don't make any headway. Okay, so then... Okay. Remember me telling you about the Central Bituminous Field, right?
Yep.
The Union is able to organize and get the Union established in those states. But the coal operators in those states are now getting undercut by the West Virginia coal operators. Now, this is before you have like big coal companies like Alpha Natural Resources or Arch Coal that have coal mines in like 10 different countries. It wasn't like that back then. You had completely different coal companies in different states.
Yeah.
They were independently, and they were all competing against one another. Right. And so the coal companies in West Virginia, they had to ship their coal further than the other states in order to get their coal to the big cities. And so it was more expensive for them to ship their coal. So they wanted to cut costs at all costs, right? And their big way of cutting costs was to keep the Union out and to keep this system, this mine guard system going.
Yeah.
Right.
Pay people in peanuts.
Yes. And so they're able to undersell all the other coal operators. So all the other coal operators meet with the UMWA and say, if you guys don't get West Virginia organized, we're cutting our contracts with you. So now it becomes vital for the survival of the United Mine Workers to organize West Virginia. The coal operators, of course, they think it's vital for them to keep the Union out. So there are these larger forces that are coming in that make a lot at stake, more than just what's happening at the local level, too. So they're coming in desperate to organize, but ultimately intimidation tactics keep them out until 1912 comes along. And in 1912, the workers of Paint Creek and Cabin Creek go out on strike after one of their contracts expire. Now, Paint Creek, they had a little union in Paint Creek, but they didn't have anything along Cabin Creek. And Paint Creek and Cabin Creek are, of course, in Kanawha County. Cabin Creek is famous for being the home of Jerry West, right? That's what everybody knows. Zeke from Cabin Creek. That's how people know about Cabin Creek. Randy Moss is from that area too, and Jason Williams, DuPont.
Yeah.
area.
Nitro High School, I think that's where they went.
Yeah, you got to, but they're all out that way towards Cabin Creek. But anyway, though, they all go out on strike. And of course, the next thing that happens is they all get fired and then they all get evicted. The companies will not even allow them to take their belongings out and use the roads because the companies own the roads. So they have to take their stuff along the creek beds and carry them on the creeks. Again, they had guards on the roads, armed guards, not letting like families.
Dude, this is crazy.
Yeah.
It's like what we're seeing overseas in the freaking, not quite to this extent, but like, in the Gaza Strip or something. Like they just got guards everywhere and death. Are people getting killed actively during this, or is that not really recorded?
It gets started up.
Okay.
At this point in time. So they try to go out on strike. They end up there's a couple of places that aren't owned by the companies along Paint Creek and Cabin Creek. One of them is Holly Grove along Paint Creek. So miners set up a tent colony there, and they and their families all move into tents. And then Eskdale, which, by the way, was part of the property that my family owned. The first mayor of Eskdale was a Keeney, James Keeney, I believe. But anyway, Eskdale was one place that the coal companies didn't own. So the miners went there to have a tent colony there. And that's where Keeney and Blizzard and Mooney were.
Gotcha.
And once they go out, they start getting desperate. The coal companies start bringing in replacement workers, which of course the miners called scabs, right? And this is now everything's at stake, because if those scabs get established, then these people are out, on their own. My great grandfather, Frank Keeney, this is in July. He's got 3 kids at this point in time, and they're all sick. Really sick. They've all got, I'm not exactly sure what they had, but they were all really sick. All the kids were sick. His wife was pregnant. They're all living in a tent. He's just a miner. He's trying to figure out what on earth to do. So he sneaks on a train and goes to Charleston, to the Union headquarters in Charleston, which at the time was on Summer Street in Charleston, if you know your Charleston area, right in the middle of downtown. So they go, he goes to the Union headquarters and says, look, you guys got to help. You got to get some organizers down to Cabin Creek and come down and help. And they were like, no, it's too dangerous. Everybody we send down there, people just don't come back, or they get beat up and all this.
You get Jimmy Hoffed.
Yeah,
everyone
they get Jimmy Hoffed. They're underneath Mountaineer Field somewhere,
right? Yep,
or something like that. So, Kenny gets furious with them, calls them a bunch of cowards, and says, "Look, if you won't go, I'll find a woman who will go." He knew that Mother Jones had just come into town. And that's Mary Harris Jones, also known as Mother Jones. Irish. Her husband and children had died, and she becomes a very famous labor organizer, first with the Knights of Labor, then later with the United Mine Workers. And West Virginia kind of becomes her cause when she gets to West Virginia. She called it medieval West Virginia. And she said the conditions in West Virginia were worse than anywhere in America. And she famously said, when I get to the other side, I'm going to tell God Almighty about West Virginia.
Oh, wow.
Because she said, even God's forgotten about West Virginia.
Yeah.
And so he went to her. She wrote about this in her autobiography. He came to her in Charleston and says, will you come to Cabin Creek with me and help organize the miners? And she's like, I'll come. And so they get in the train and they go back to Cabin Creek a few days later. And then when Mother Jones gets there, things start to really change. She gets there and the miners are astonished with her. First of all, she's really foul-mouthed. She uses a lot of profanity. She spoke with a heavy Irish accent too. Right? And we don't know exactly how old she was because she was always iffy about her age. You could ask her one day and she would say she's 85, and ask her the next day, she'd say she's 80. So we don't know exactly how old she was. But she was approaching her 80s at this point. But to see an 80-year-old-ish woman show up and have no fear of the mine guards, It kind of shamed the coal miners themselves. She shows up at the railroad junction on Cabin Creek, and they've got a machine gun emplacement there that's pointed, at the train. So whenever people get off, there are mine guards there that are inspecting everybody that comes in and out of the train. And she walks up to, there's several different accounts of this, but according to the story, she walks right up to the machine gun, just like right up straight to it. And then she starts, some accounts say she took her purse and started hitting one of the mine guards with her purse. Another one says that she just started cussing them out and calling them a bunch of cowards and said, if any of you tried anything on me, there's 50 armed men in those hills right there, and they're going to gun down every last one of you, which was a lie. There weren't.
Right.
But the fact that she was just that bold, kind of emboldened the miners, and she encouraged the miners to fight back, and not fight back with protest signs, fight back with guns.
This is like 3 out of 5 West Virginia grandmas now. So she kind of, born that stereotype.
Yeah.
That's great.
So the miners start compiling guns, and they start organizing themselves into groups called Minutemen, which was, of course, indicative of the Minutemen from Lexington and Concord, right? The Revolutionary War. They also, there was one group, Keeney and Mooney were a part of this, called the Dirty 11. Before there was the Dirty Dozen, there was the Dirty 11. Right, you've heard about the Dirty Dozen.
This is awesome. Yes, I haven't heard about this, but yeah, I know the Dirty Dozen. Yeah,
the Dirty Dozen, right? Well, you had the Dirty 11 in the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek story, and they did some of the dirtier stuff. One of the members of the Dirty 11 was a black miner named Dan Chain, but he was more famously known as Few Clothes Johnson. He was portrayed by James Earl Jones in the film Matewan.
Oh yeah, okay.
Although actually, Few Clothes wasn't really in Matewan. He was on Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, but the director of the film, John Sells, just liked the character so much he wanted to put him in Matewan, and so that's where James Earl Jones got that part. So this was the Dirty 11, and they did things like blow up mine tipples. At first, they wanted to stop production, make sure the scabs couldn't work. So they would dynamite mine tipples, or attack the entrance to the mines and not let people get in, or attack the mine guards themselves. There was one incident when over 10 mine guards were surrounded and shot and killed by, we think, the Dirty 11 and maybe a couple of others. The bodies were taken back into town, and then the miners snuck in at night and put on the coffins signs that said, "Gone to hell, more to go."
Can Tarantino make this movie? That would be incredible.
Yeah, it would be. It would be.
It sounds like Inglourious Bastards, but Appalachian version.
Yes. Inglorious Rednecks.
Yes. Dude,
I don't know.
It'd be so epic.
So there are all these shootouts. Basically, guerrilla warfare starts to break out along Paint Creek and Cabin Creek. And there are all kinds of little crazy stories that come out of this strike. There were nearby miners that weren't in the strike zone, a bunch of Italian miners at this place called Boomer over the hill from Cabin Creek, which is on the Midland Trail, I believe. If you take the Midland Trail towards New River Gorge from Charleston, you'll go through it. The miners called them the Boomer Tallies. The Italians from Boomer, and they started smuggling guns into the miners because it was hard to get guns into the strike zone. So they would get guns and they would take them up on certain places in the hills and make marks at a tree, and then bury the guns, and then the miners would go up to the spot and dig them out and take them. And there's martial law that gets declared 3 times during this strike. And at one point, they confiscate many of the guns, and there's a famous picture taken outside the state capitol in Charleston of all the guns that they confiscated from miners after one of the martial law declarations. Imagine if you just put in Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strike pics, you'll probably find it. It's one of the more famous pictures of all the guns that they took.
Is this it?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Dude. Yeah, I'll bring this up on screen so everybody can see.
Yeah, you can see the different boxes of ammunition back there.
And who are these people in the background?
Those are National Guard.
Okay.
The National Guard.
Wow. So people listening audio only, probably what? Hundreds and hundreds. I don't know how many.
Yeah, if not thousands.
What are these boxes back here?
It's ammunition.
Okay, ammunition. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
They had all these crazy ways of getting guns and ammunition into the strike zone. I just told you one of them. Interesting way that they got bullets in to the mines. And this was told to me by one of the descendants. So the women would sneak a lot of the bullets in. And what they would do is they would get trained. They would get on the train. They go into Charleston to Union headquarters and pick up bullets, right? And then they would take the bullets and put them in their underwear. Put them either in their bras or in their panties, right? Stick them in their undergarments. And because they knew that the mine guards wouldn't touch them right there whenever they got off the trains.
Yeah.
And so that's how they would smuggle a lot of bullets in.
Man, this is amazing. Which I remember hearing that a little bit, but just hearing everything lay out and how the struggle.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, of course, one of the more famous incidents that took place in that strike, Paint Creek, Cabin Creek, was the Bull Moose Special raid. And this was an armored train that the coal operators created, and they put machine guns on the train. And the train would go by the Holly Grove tent colony, and they would pepper the tent colony with machine gun fire.
Whoa.
Now I've been to Holly Grove, to the site of where this happened, and they did one attack in February 1912, and miraculously only one person got killed. A guy named Estep got killed, and people are like, "Well, how on earth can only one person get killed if they're peppering the tent colony with machine gun fire?" Well, if you go there, one of the things that you find out is that the tent colony was kind of in a bit of a little valley, a dip, and the tracks were above. And what the miners did and their families, they would dig like little trenches, like a trench in their tent, so that whenever they were sleeping, they were a little bit below the ground. And then they would take cast iron skillets and stack the cast iron skillets up on the sides as bullet protection. So the fact that they were a little bit further down, and the way the machine guns were, you could like swivel them, but you couldn't make them go up and down. So they would graze basically the tops of all the tents.
Wow. When
they would go through. So they weren't really killing a lot of people. They were unless terrorizing these families. There was like another battle after that that the miners did in retaliation, the Battle of Mucklow, which was one of the little towns along Paint Creek, that about somewhere between 15 and 20 people get killed in that gunfight in retaliation for what they called the Bull Moose Special Raid. And by the way, the sheriff of Kanawha County was in the train the night that they did that specific attack. And the sheriff reportedly said, after they went through, let's back up and give them another round.
Does the federal government just like, y'all do whatever, like we're not going in Appalachia, I don't really like, how does this just happen?
Yeah, how does this happen? Well, the government at this time is operating under the guise, actually we're kind of reverting to this right now, but laissez-faire economics. Okay. And laissez-faire economics is a French term meaning kind of hands off or let it be, meaning that the government does not intervene with businesses. And the government doesn't regulate businesses. The government's got to let businesses and the free market kind of run on itself, what they call the invisible hand of the free market, if you know your Adam Smith. But so they don't intervene until things get really, really bad. And if they do intervene, they typically intervene on the side of the companies in order to restore order. There were a few cases like the Pullman strike in Illinois or the Homestead strike in Pennsylvania, where eventually things would get violent. And so they bring in the National Guard or they bring in the military. And usually what that does is that breaks the strike, where they come in basically just arrest all of the workers and then say that order has been restored.
Hmm.
So the federal government, they do end up in 1913. The U.S. Senate does open up an investigation into Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, but I'll get to that.
Sure,
in a
yeah, take
second.
your time. Take your time.
Yeah. So all of this conflict keeps going. Meanwhile, in 1912, at the end of the year 1912, a new governor gets elected, Henry Hatfield, who was a nephew of Devalance Hatfield.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there he is, Henry D. Hatfield.
This dude. Okay, got it. Yeah.
And he was a doctor, actually. His first day, he says he's going to be different than previous governors. And he kind of tries to be. His first day in office, because he's a doctor, he takes his physician's bag and he goes to Paint Creek and Cabin Creek and starts administering, giving medical treatment to kids in the strike zone personally. Which, okay, that seems like, all right, maybe this guy's different. Maybe we're going to...
It's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he tries to arbitrate by the way, in reaction to this, the coal companies sent a couple of reps to his office in Charleston and were like, what are you doing going down there? How dare you? And he punched one of them out.
Oh, nice.
Which doesn't happen very often. You don't see a lot of West Virginia governors willing to punch a coal operator.
Sure. They're willing to eat a sandwich or two. Oh, no. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right. That's the only mean joke of the episode. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So far. We've got a ways to go.
Oh, man.
So, Hatfield punches him out, but ultimately Hatfield tries to negotiate a settlement between the union and the coal companies. And in April, they do negotiate a settlement of 1913. It was called the Hatfield Agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And the union, the United Mine Workers as an organization, agreed to it. Basically, the miners would agree to go back to work and they would get a raise. And they got like one or two other concessions, but they didn't get the right to join a union. The miners, they had a number of different demands. One of them was the right to join a union, get paid in American money, no more mine guards, freedom of assembly. That was one of their strike demands.
Wow.
Freedom of assembly. Also, because they couldn't all just gather together in a meeting because they might be talking about unions.
Right.
And one of the other ones was for a check weighman. Okay, now what that was is, so you had to weigh your coal out, right, to get paid because you're paid by the ton. Well, coal companies would often fix the scales. So a ton didn't actually equal a ton. Miners called it the long ton. So you'd be like a ton, 1 1/3 ton would count as a ton on these scales. Like, we got to have our own guy that we hire, that we put there with the company guy to make sure they don't fix the scales so we can get paid what we're owed.
Right.
Okay. Well, they didn't get any of that with this agreement. They got a raise, and they got a couple other small concessions, but the mine guards are still going to be there. They're not going to get a check weighman, and they can't unionize. Well, the union agrees to this and they tell all the miners to go back to work. But Keeney and Mooney are not in that meeting because they're not union officials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're just coal miners. They took over the strike, and they're leading all of these little guerrilla attacks and really directing the violence. By the way, I got to tell one more.
Sure.
There was one incident, Mother Jones giving a speech on Paint Creek, and the miners bring up to her a jacket of one of the mine guards that they had just shot, and it had blood all over it. And she holds up the coat in front of the crowd and says, "This is the first time I ever saw a mine guard's coat decorated to suit me."
Oh, wow. Dude, she's raw.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I see why she's such a historical loved figure.
Yeah.
Like, she's like a really a symbol.
Yeah.
I like it now.
Yeah.
A fight of, fighting for your rights.
Yeah. She is. She's not as well known as I think she should be. Whenever they talk about Women's History Month, you don't hear people talking about Mother Jones, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's another conversation. But anyway,
That's a good point because, like, you know, I've been involved with it, thankfully, working and collaborating with you all for the past several years. So I just think, of course, people know this stuff, but a majority actually don't.
Yeah.
So,
you get people outside of West Virginia that they've never heard of Mother Jones.
Sure.
And they should. I mean, I think they should know her as well as they know Susan B. Anthony, right?
Yeah.
Or Betty Friedan, for that matter. But nonetheless, Justice Collins, the most powerful coal operator in West Virginia, called her the most dangerous woman in America. So
that's great. Now, were corporations like that's so cool to hear that corporations kind of squeeze the union to come into West Virginia because of the prices.
Yeah.
Were corporations in West Virginia competing like, hey, if you come over here, we'll give you 2 scripts for bread instead of 1? Or like, were they doing things to try and get workers?
That's a really good question. No, they really weren't, because by this time they had started their own organization, the West Virginia Coal Miners Association, and they had them in different groups. They had the Logan County Co-operators Association, the Kanawha County Co-operators Association. Now, they did compete a little bit with one another, but they largely stayed on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
For example, they shared blacklists. You know, if one guy was caught, you know, trying to organize or join a union, they would share those miners' names with all the other companies. So to blacklist. So they cooperated a whole lot within the state of West Virginia with one another.
I got Friends of Coal vibes, kind of like the corporations kind of start their own thing.
Yeah, and we're going to talk some Friends of Coal in a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay.
But but what they did do is they did compete heavily against other industries, and at times driving other industries out of West Virginia. One big example is the glass industry. There was a huge glass industry in West Virginia early on, particularly in Fairmont and Clarksburg, Morgantown, Huntington, Blinko Glass, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Carnival, what's that? Carnival Glass? Oh, I can't remember the company, but yeah.
There's Fiesta Ware way up in the northern panhandle, although they weren't around yet. But there's a lot of glass companies in West Virginia. It was a really thriving industry. And A.B. Fleming, it was a co-operator who became governor, and a few of the other big company bosses ran the glass industry out of West Virginia because the glass industry was unionized. And they didn't want any industries that had unions in West Virginia, and they also didn't want the miners to have any other options. People often say, I got this a lot when we were trying to save Blair Mountain, and you had the war on coal and all that going on, and during the Obama administration, and all that, and everybody was telling me, you know, if we don't have coal, what do we do? It's like, well, if you knew our history, we did a bunch of other stuff. Before the Civil War, Western Virginia had a better economy than Eastern Virginia. You don't think of that, right? You think of Virginia having the better economy than West Virginia, right? But before coal, we had a better economy. We had a more diverse economy.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow.
You had the salt industry, you had the glass industry, you had a brick making industry, you had a little bit of coal, but you also had the timber industry, and you had a lot of, you had in the towns, you had a building middle class that was really coming up in West Virginia. But the industrial period takes all of that out. And by the time you get to 1920, it's just coal. Unless you're in the Kanawha Valley, you can work for the chemical companies, right? You can work in Chemical Valley. But
is a large portion of that due to what they did to the glass industry? Like they would push out companies that actually treated people with respect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, they make it harder for them to come into the state. And then they tell people, well, if we don't have coal, there's nothing else for us to do here.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. So it takes away the possibilities. And if you tell people that for a century, they you know, what else can we do?
Sure.
There's nothing else for us.
And you got to understand that too. But at the same time, they don't, like, I didn't know this, you know, so I imagine if you hear that stuff, it's going to it's going to kind of piss you off a little bit. So it's like, daggone it. We could have been booming, son.
Yeah, and they still do things to keep other industries out.
Sure.
And one of the big things they do is they'll get these mining permits, particularly mountaintop removal or surface mining permits that are huge, 700 acres, 1,000 acres here, these huge permits. And they'll get the permit to mine there maybe a decade or even 20 years before they even intend to mine it. So they get the permit and they have the land so they can just sit on the land and nothing happens to that land until they decide they want to mine it. And that prevents any other type of economic development.
Yeah, and they'll gate it. You can't even go across it. And, people get upset. Like, I've walked that trail for 50 years. Like, well, sorry,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Places
sense.
where you used to be able to hunt and stuff that gets restricted, things like that. So anyway, long story short, back to Hatfield.
Right. This is incredible.
Yeah. So back to Hatfield. So he makes this agreement. The union agrees to it. They're like, this is the best deal we're going to get. Let's just take it. And they tell all the miners to go back to work. A lot of them do, but they wait like a month or two. And Keeney and Mooney lead all of them back out on strike. And they're like, we're not going to go by the Hatfield agreement. The union leadership doesn't speak for us. And we're going back out on strike. So they do in the summer of 1913. They go back out. And they're specifically led by Keeney and Mooney at this point in time. And they go out, and by the time they go out, by this time, the U.S. Senate is investigating the conditions along Paint Creek and Cabin Creek. They had put Mother Jones under arrest, under house arrest. She got put under house arrest in Pratt along Paint Creek. And by the way, the house that she was put in under arrest, that was put on the National Register of Historic Places. And the coal companies bulldozed it in the 90s.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they bulldozed it.
Goodness.
In the 90s.
Out of spite? Or were they trying to really?
Out of spite.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
I'm just curious if the house
that's it.
This green one?
No,
or this one
that
here
one
on the
right
left?
there.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I got it on the screen here.
Yeah, one of our issues of In These Hills, the Mine Wars Museum Journal, we have a picture of her getting arrested and getting put in that house. But yeah, they bulldoze it down. But anyway, Mother Jones, one of the things she was really, really good at, so she's cussing and screaming and all this stuff. Then they put her under arrest. She was great with the press because once that happens, suddenly she changes her persona entirely. She writes letters to senators and things like this because she knew a lot of powerful people by this time. And so reporters start coming in from other parts of the state. And so when reporters get there and get to interview her under house arrest, she's just this sweet old lady. I just want to be here for my boys.
Here's some beans and cornbread, honey.
Yeah, and they're just roughing me up and got me in this old house, and I just want to help the children, that kind of stuff.
Right.
She was great at, portraying this sweet old lady that they're just roughing around, when a few months later she's holding up a bloody coat,
Oh, that's great.
So she was really good at that. And so a lot of national attention gets brought there because of her getting put under arrest. I think of her almost like the Apostle Paul, because Paul did his best stuff when he was in jail. Like most of the New Testament of the Bible was written when Paul was in jail, right? So he wrote all those letters like the Corinthians and Ephesians when he's in jail, right?
Wow.
While he was under guard by the Romans. So she did a lot of her best stuff when she was in jail too. I think that's my point, is she found a way of being really effective and them pinning her up. But anyway, so the U.S. Senate is investigating. Well, the coal operators were denying that they had mine guards. They're like, we don't have private police. We don't have private guards going around intimidating people. Well, the miners are back out on strike. Well, the Senate, some of the investigation committee, some of them come to Paint Creek and Cabin Creek. Well, they've got to get rid of the guards. And so this enables the strikers to hold out. And so they hold out through the summer, and they end up getting pretty much everything they wanted by the end of the summer. And what this does, so the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strike becomes a big victory for the miners in West Virginia. and Keeney and Mooney then become kind of the leaders of this union movement. They're going to then get elected to be the leaders in West Virginia, and the union officials that were accepted the agreement, they get kicked out.
Yeah, they started their own district, right? Like a different chapter.
Yeah. That's a whole. They felt that the union leadership was corrupt and they weren't tough enough, and they wanted new elections to be held, and the UMWA refused. And so then Keeney says, "I'm going to create my own district and pull out and create my own union." Well, all the miners along Paint Creek and Cabin Creek joined his union, and so the UMWA doesn't know what to do. And he's like, "Well, if you give me new elections, I'll take everybody back into the union." And so they were like, okay. So he brings everybody back in. They hold elections. Then he and Mooney get elected.
Sure.
Him as president, Mooney as secretary treasurer, and a guy named Bill Petrie as vice president. So they take over. And when they take over, Keeney starts in 1917. And this is right when we're getting into World War I. And they go on this organizing drive, and they organize they get about 50,000 people, miners joining the union in the year 1917. And they organize every county in the state except 3: Logan, Mingo, and McDowell. Those are the only 3 counties that don't get organized. So things, appear to be looking up, right? But they still got those 3 counties that are holdouts.
What was the reason?
Well, Logan County, Mingo, first of all, Mingo and McDowell counties, they were a little bit behind some of the other counties in their coal development. So at first, they're not they don't have as much coal, but they're going to really increase. Logan County, by 1920, Logan County is going to be the #1 coal producer in West Virginia. It was Kanawha County, and Logan County replaces it. But Logan County has a sheriff that is there specifically just to keep the union out, and his name was Don Chafin. Now, Chafin didn't use Baldwin Felts guards. He had his own deputies. He had 300 deputies in Logan County. I don't know if you ever spent any time in Logan County.
Oh, yeah.
I think they have like 4 now.
Right, yeah.
In Logan County, they don't have hardly any cops. I think there's a state police barracks, a couple of those, but I mean, but they don't have like a lot of county cops. They just got like a handful of them. When I first went down there to teach some at Southern in like 2010, there were 4 cops in the town, and 2 of them didn't have a car.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, that's like where I grew up. We have 4 stoplights, and they're all in the same place in the whole county.
Yeah, where'd you grow up?
Welch.
Oh, yeah, Welch.
Well, I grew up in Ashland, Kentucky until 5th grade, and then I moved to Welch.
Okay.
That's where I remained for quite a while. So,
yeah. Well, one of my good friends and colleagues that was secretary treasurer of Friends of Blair Mountain was Mark Myers. He grew up in Welch, too.
Oh, cool.
And he's got a doctorate also from WVU. He lives in Indiana now, but he was really, really a big help to us. But anyway,
Don Chafin.
Don Chafin ran Logan County with an iron fist. He didn't let nobody came in and out of Logan County without his permission. He would even kick state mine inspectors out of the county, wouldn't let them in.
Oh, wow.
Somebody from the governor's office got sent to go down and inspect some of the mines. And he had the guy beat within an inch of his life and thrown back on the train, and sent a message to the governor and saying, "You don't send somebody into my county without my permission."
Oh, wow. So he's one of those dudes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really, I mean, a really rough and tumble kind of guy. He was basically a gangster. And by the way, if you go to Logan today, there's a bowling alley in Logan, and below that is a bar. And it used to be a speakeasy in the 1920s. when they had prohibition, the speakeasies were, the illegal bars, and Chafin ran the speakeasy.
Okay.
And it was the only place where you could get alcohol in Logan County. And Chafin went around and shut down all the whiskey stills in the town. He shut down all the moonshiners, so the only place you could get liquor is from him.
Oh, gangsters loved prohibition, man.
Yeah. Guys like Capone.
Yeah.
The Untouchables is one of my favorite.
So he's like
films.
the Appalachian untouchable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow,
The De Niro,
Yeah.
Capone. So he had that little bar, and he shut down all the moonshining things. But this plays into the mine wars too, because he shut down the Hatfields moonshine stills. The Hatfield family had moved from Mingo County to Logan County after the feud.
Is this the family?
The family. This is Devil Anse.
Okay.
Devil Anse lived into early 1921. So he was still alive. He still lived out on his place on Island Creek out there. The old Hatfield homestead is still there. I think it's where they've got a Hatfield McCoy Museum there that's just been up and running. But so Devil Anse was there with a few of his kids. Cap Hatfield, I believe, and a few of the others had whiskey. So they all got shut down. So they hated Chafin because they shut down their whiskey stills. And so they started helping the Union out of spite. Not so much that they were like pro-Union guys. They just hated Chafin so much. They started helping the Union. Devil Anse's kids would sneak Frank Keeney into Logan County on horseback. And he would stay at Devil Anse's house, and they would sneak him over into the mines. And Devil Anse would send his grandkids. His grandkids were like in their 20s at this time, to Frank Keeney's house in Charleston to guard his house while he was in Logan County organizing, because he had so many death threats. One of his daughters, Geraldine, I interviewed her a few times before she died. And she was a little girl at the time. She was like 6 or 7 years old. And she said she vividly remembers looking out of her bedroom window at night, and like there'd be some of the Hatfield boys standing outside with their rifles, spitting on the grass, guarding their place at night when Dad was away. And Frank's wife, Bessie, she kept whenever he was gone, she kept a Smith & Wesson under her pillow at night. I've got that gun that she had. By the way, she was supposed to be a better shot than he was.
Right.
It was said that you could line cans up on a fence, and she could just pick them all off.
Oh, that's amazing.
At the time. But anyway, so the Hatfields really help out, and they at Blair Mountain, the Battle of Blair Mountain, the miners knew where the defensive positions were set up on the ridgelines because the Hatfields had scouted it out and got that information to the Union.
I didn't know they was that involved with it.
Yeah. Well, nobody knew. I found out that from Frank Keeney's children, who were still alive when I first started interviewing this. And I had to do, so there's no written record of any of this.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things about the mine wars. There's so much of it that's just passed down. And it's really, really appropriate for this podcast, because you're always looking at the stories that are almost folklore, or the stories that get passed down from generation to generation. That's such an important part of our history in West Virginia, because so much of it has been attempted to be erased, that the stories that grandparents tell their grandkids become the narrative that kind of holds us together.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and the story of oppression, like, of course, that's dark.
Yeah.
Like, this stuff needs to be known. So I appreciate you laying it out. So, all right. So Don Chafin's running liquor, technically illegally, but also closing all the stills. Hatfield start helping the Union. What starts to unfold after that?
Okay. So it's World War I is over. We've made the world safe for democracy, according to Wilson. Actually, of course, we did not make the world safe for democracy. Everything got worse in Europe. By the way, there's all these, you got to think too, right after World War I, there's all kinds of unrest in Europe and in the United States. Like, there's revolutions everywhere. There's huge workers' uprisings in Austria, in Italy. There was this thing in Italy called the Red Years, where they had like 2 years of just straight workers' revolts right after the war. You had the Russian Civil War that was going on at that time. 3 million dead between the communists and the whites, and then you had the Irish Revolution over in Ireland that was going on. So it's a turbulent time.
It's a rough time.
Yeah. You have massive strikes also that are going on in the United States. Huge steel workers strike. Like 300,000 dock workers were going on strike. So there was a lot of that going on anyway. Well, Keeney and the new president of the United Mine Workers is a guy by the name of John L. Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the more significant labor leaders of the 20th century.
He's the, yep, eyebrows.
Yes.
Right. Let's see here.
Yes, Mr. Eyebrows.
Yeah. So I got him on the screen.
Geraldine, the lady that I told you I interviewed, he came to Frank Keeney's house a number of times during all of this. And she said she didn't like John L. Lewis. She was like, I remember that big bulldog face.
It'd take you an hour to brush those eyebrows.
Yeah, I know. That's some serious. That's some serious stuff right there.
Yeah. So he's a good dude, right? In history?
Yeah. Oh, overall, yes. I mean, he's the creator of the CIO, like the AFL-CIO.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he created the CIO.
Oh wow. Okay.
That ultimately organized all the steel workers and the auto workers and got them. So he was for a while between the 30s and the 50s. He was the most powerful labor leader in America, by far, the most influential and powerful. But anyway, he's just new on the job, and he wants to get the rest of West Virginia organized, and so does Frank Keeney. Well, they go down in early 1920. They try to send some folks into Logan County and places to get organized, but they don't really make any headway just because there's too many mine guards, too many deputies. It's just too tough to get a foothold. Well, they announced that they're going to redouble their efforts, and the union's really going to put a lot of money into this. So they go to Bluefield, and they go right across the road from the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency where their headquarters is, and they hold a big press conference, like right across on the other side of the street from the Baldwin Felts, and say that we're going to organize these counties. And Keeney said, if our organizers come back in pine boxes, heaven nor hell will not contain us. So you kill any more of our organizers, we're coming at you like we did on Paint Creek and Cabin Creek.
Heck yeah.
So Mooney was a fascinating guy in his own right. Frank Keeney called him crazy mean. And he was
Fred Mooney, right?
Fred Mooney.
Yep.
Yeah, that's him and Frank Keeney right there.
Oh yeah, that's a good picture.
And Mooney on the left and Keeney on the right.
Yep, got it up.
We were lucky enough,
and it's crazy how much you look like him there.
Oh, that's Mooney.
Oh, that's Mooney. Okay.
That's Mooney. Keeney's the one on the right.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Oh, even still.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
There might be some family resemblance there. Yeah. But Mooney was, like I said, he wrote an autobiography before he died. He committed suicide.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Didn't realize that.
And I was lucky enough. We were lucky enough after the museum opened up, we got contacted from his family that all lived in Indiana. His whole family, and all of his so he had some surviving children. He had a ton of kids. He got married 4 times. And had a bunch of kids, and some of them were still alive, and they heard about the Mine Wars Museum and said, we're coming. And so they came, and I got to give his whole family a tour. And we did a sit down. We got my family together and his family together, and we got to sit them all down in a round table and film a full-on discussion of everybody's memories.
Wow. Yeah, one of the great grandkids was there when I was there this past week.
Oh yeah,
of Mooney's. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, because it was odd just looking at him and then looking at the picture. It was like, whoa, this is creepy. Well,
I'm glad. I'm glad that they're still around. They're still involved. But anyway, Mooney he was literate, he was smart, he was also very well self-educated, but also a bit on the crazy side. He and another guy was really becoming influential in the Union in West Virginia at this time. His name was Bill Blizzard. Bill Blizzard is going to become much more famous after Blair Mountain, but he was an up-and-comer. And Bill Blizzard was younger. He was about 10 years younger than Keeney and Mooney. So he was only just a teenager when the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike began. But he's becoming of age, and he and Keeney were really close. Like really close to the point to where Mooney started getting jealous of Blizzard's relationship with him. He thought Blizzard had too much of his ear. And so they were really starting to brush up against one another. One day, Bill Blizzard's son told me this story before he died. Luckily, I was able to get a lot of these stories before a lot of these people passed.
Thank goodness.
And Blizzard told me that Mooney Bill Blizzard Jr. He told me that Mooney invited Blizzard Sr. to go hunting with him. Let's go hunting together. Let's go squirrel hunting. And Keeney told Mooney, or told Blizzard, he's like, don't you go hunting with him. He'll shoot you. And to which Blizzard said, well, not if I shoot him first. And so they go. Blizzard was so hot-tempered that he would keep... they all carried guns with them all the time, right? All carried guns with them constantly. But Blizzard would keep his gun empty and keep his bullets in another pocket because he had such a temper. He wanted to have time to load his gun before he just shot.
So he can change his mind.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah, so he had time to cool down. That was his kind of safety measure. But anyway, Blizzard and Mooney go hunting together, and both of them just kind of stand. They both like hunker down on both sides of a holler, and they just sit there and stare at each other all morning. And ultimately, nobody makes a move, and they're like, "Are we going to go home? All right, let's go home." Then they didn't shoot any squirrels or anything. They just sit there and stared at each other for a couple hours, and like, "All right, I guess we're not going to kill each other." So then they went home. But anyway, Mooney was a pretty dynamic guy himself. And he gets sent, and Blizzard, they go into Matewan in the spring of 1920. And they hold the first couple of union meetings in Matewan. Now, Matewan, of course, was the one town in that area that the coal companies didn't own. The town was built as a little railroad depot for the Norfolk and Western Railroad. And
so they go in there. Let's see if I can find an old picture of
Matewan
here. There we go.
Yeah, there's Matewan from the sky. That railroad depot that you see on the left by the train tracks, that, of course, that's not there now. It's been moved. They made a replica of it. Don Blankenship helped fund that. That's over there.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yes. When he funded that, and I don't know what it's like now, but when we first had opened up the museum, if you went in there, basically it blamed the mine wars on the Union. It was like a very different story.
Sure.
Of what happened. It actually focuses more on the Hatfields and Hatfield McCoys than it does anything else. But anyway, though, that's where the depot was in 1920. They come in. They're very successful. Mother Jones gets in the act, too. She comes back to West Virginia. She's coming down there. They meet in a church that's still there. This old stone church that's still there. It's across the railroad tracks from the museum on the other side. You can see it from the downtown. You can't see it from this picture.
Right.
But anyway, it's over there past where the depot is. It was still standing right beside the jail.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's that church right beside the jail.
Yeah.
You know where the little jail is.
Yep.
Okay, so of course, the local companies react to this by, first of all, trying to get workers to sign what they call yellow dog contracts, which is you agree that you're not going to join a union.
Walmart does the same thing still. I'm sorry to tangent, but
No,
when I
this
when
is
I got
fine.
hired on at Walmart, they like 6 out of 8 hours of the training was watching videos explaining why we didn't need union representation. So that stuff still happens.
I remember that I worked for Sam's Club when I was an undergrad.
Okay, it's probably same deal.
Yeah, exact same deal. We went and watched this because you're an associate. You're not an employee. You're an associate. That's special.
Yeah, you don't need someone else to speak for you.
Yeah.
You can speak for yourself. I'm like, this is weird. And then I got to go like all I have to do is open boxes and put them on shelves. And, there's literally no training involved in that. But I did spend 6 hours on why I shouldn't unionize. So, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Right.
So they're doing this here and they're making them sign papers saying, don't do it.
Yeah, we have a copy of one of those Yellow Dog contracts at the museum.
Oh, wow. Legit?
It's a copy of one that was originally made. It's not an original, but it's a copy of an original.
Got it.
That's on the wall in that section. But anyway, so miners who refuse are being fired from their jobs. Other miners that just flat out join the union are being fired. So what happens? It's May the 19th. 1920. Here come the Baldwin Felts detectives, and you've got Albert and Lee Felts, and these are two of the top guys of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency coming in here to personally handle this. And another guy by the name of C.B. Cunningham was also one of the mine guards that was there as well. I believe he's down in the bottom. In the middle, I believe that's Cunningham with the mustache.
Oh, gotcha. On the left. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's Cunningham.
Got it.
But the reason I mentioned them is that they were there. I believe it was Albert and Cunningham, or it might have been Lee and Cunningham. Sometimes I get the brothers confused. But anyway, one of the brothers in Cunningham, first, they did play a role in the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strike. They were in the thick of things there. They also played a big role in the Colorado coal strikes, which took place in 1914. Right after Paint Creek, Cabin Creek, there was big coal strikes in Colorado. Some of the same tents that they had at Holly Grove, the Union packed up and took them to Colorado for the miners there. Mother Jones went there too. And it was a really bloody incident called the Ludlow Massacre. Which took place in 1914, in which the Baldwin Felts attacked a tent colony, set fire to it, and it's over a dozen people were killed. Over half, most of them were women and children that died in the fire.
Oh, wow.
And then the gunfight, there was like several big gunfights that took place after that. So there was a little Colorado mine war there in 1914. But anyway, Cunningham and Felts led that attack in Ludlow. That killed those women and children.
So they just travel and violate the Constitution.
Yes.
Like that's basically what their job is. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Man, that's crazy. And so they're in Matewan.
So they're in Matewan. They come into town. They're going to go out of town to the little coal camps and start evicting people. They have a number of evictions that they're going to handle that day. Of course, the chief of police at Matewan is one Sid Hatfield, right? And the mayor is a guy by the name of Cabell Testerment. These guys are pro-union guys.
Yep. I got Sid on the screen. Okay.
These guys are pro-union. Something I forgot to mention something earlier, but I'll get back to it. I'll come back to it. Well, we're too much into the flow of Matewan right now. So Hatfield himself, pro-union, it's such a big deal to the miners because it's a law, man, that can't be bought. Okay? Obviously, the coal miners and the law, as it were at the time, aren't getting along. They don't have a lot of trust for cops because they're usually bought and paid for guys like Don Chafin, right? They're bought and paid for. Coal companies were paying Chafin at least $30,000 a year under the table.
Oh.
And that's in addition to the coal stocks that he had.
That's fat stacks back then, too. Yeah.
Yeah. The average steel worker at this time made about $600 a year.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
Whew. And so Sid Hatfield's relation to Devil Anse, a lot of people don't like. What is the exact lineage there?
It's iffy because he's not directly related. He's in with the Hatfields of the area. He claimed to be more directly related to Devil Anse than what he really was. I have kind of an ongoing Southern West Virginia joke where everybody in Southern West Virginia is part Cherokee and is related to Devil Anse Hatfield.
Even Sid. So they're like kissing cousins. Like he could have babies with his, somebody and they'd be okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So they're very distant.
Yeah. So they're not. Again, there's some speculation that he might have been adopted or kind of taken in, an illegitimate child that was taken in.
Gotcha. Okay.
Nonetheless, he's got the name. He's got the name Hatfield. So it's an important name to have, right, down there in the Tug Valley. And of course, where Matewan sits was the land that Devil Anse owned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Devil Anse owned that property right there.
Oh wow, he owned Matewan.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Cool.
It wasn't a town.
Okay.
When the feud was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's right next to the town, just a little bit over from it, where the famous McCoys were tied to the pawpaw bushes and executed by the Hatfields. So you're right in the thick of where the feud stuff at, and that's going to play into how the media portrays this stuff.
Sure, yeah. And there's a really. Did you watch that Kevin Costner series?
I did.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Is it like legit?
It's way better than what I thought it would be.
Okay.
And it's a movie, so they up the ante on the violence a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the first 20 minutes, like it kind of almost equaled the whole body count of the whole feud in like the first half hour, so a few extra people are getting killed and there's a little more gunplay.
Gotcha. Okay. That's good to know.
But nonetheless, they cover the chronology of a lot of the main events pretty well. The one thing that they didn't cover and that's kind of hard to cover in a movie, but as well as I, as a historian, would have liked is a lot of the reason that Perry Klein, the sheriff that was got the bounty on the Hatfields and was trying to drive them out, he wanted that land, the Devil Anse, because they'd found out how much coal there was.
Gotcha.
And when they found out how much, after like a couple of these violent incidents, things like died off for a couple of years. Then the U.S. Geologic Survey went through the Tug Valley and they found out how much coal there. And suddenly Perry Klein was like, we got to get to that coal. And so he starts working with outside investors. And basically they bring a bunch of bounty hunters and stuff and basically to drive them off the land so that land can become coal mines.
Gotcha.
And the railroad can go through.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about a pig, although the movie doesn't really do that.
Right.
But there's this misconception that the whole Hatfield-McCoy feud was about a pig. I'm sure you've heard that.
Sure. Yeah. That's on there too. It's a really good. It used to be on Netflix, 3-part series. Had Bill Paxton before he died.
Yeah. And he played McCoy, Randall McCoy.
Yep. Definitely suggest watching it. And sorry to knock you off track.
That's okay.
So Sid's in here. He's pro-union in Matewan. The Phelps agency comes in, starts, making a ruckus. Right.
And the thing about Sid was he was every bit as rough as the Baldwin Phelps detectives. All right. So this is a guy kind of, and places like Matewan were kind of like Dodge cities, They were just kind of like the Wild West, except it wasn't, out west. It was the Wild West Virginia, I guess. And so, if you were a chief of police or a sheriff in some of these small areas, you had to be willing to, break up serious bar fights, violence. They had a lot of violence, like bar fights and things like that, because cocaine was a big problem in the coal fields back then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, before at some company stores, they sold cocaine.
Bunch of Tony Montanas running around. I didn't even know cocaine existed till a certain time period. So that's good to know.
Yeah. It was legal for a while in the United States.
Oh, that is right. And it was in Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But in the company stores, they would sell. It wasn't like the powdered version that people sniff today. It was the leaf, the coca leaves.
Chew on it.
Yeah, and so they put it in their pipe. They either chew on it or put it in their pipes and smoke it like tobacco. And miners would get coke, and they would use it before their shifts in the mine so they could shovel more coal. It's like 10 Red Bulls or something, right?
Oh yeah,
and you could. Woo! You could shovel that coal.
Go for it.
But it doesn't go over really well if all of them are coked up on Friday night at the bar.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a problem.
And so the biggest, this is, you can look at, go back and look at newspaper records. This guy wrote up an article named Paul Rakes about this stuff. They were having huge problems with knife fights and gun fights in these company town saloons every weekend because people were all coked up and drunk. And so if you were a chief of police in these towns, you had to be, a pretty tough guy to be able to handle all that.
Right.
So I'm just trying to paint the picture of what kind of guy you had to be a lawman in these little isolated towns.
He's doing rails in the back and going out like, who are these guys out here causing? He's just ready to go.
Right. He's ready.
Yeah. He's ready
in more ways than one.
Oh, Lord.
So Hatfield and them dispute the fact that the detectives have a right to evict these families. They're like, look, we're going to do what we're going to do. They go into the town or out of the town and start evicting the families in their homes. They come back to catch the evening train. And then, of course, this is where things go awry. If you've seen the movie Matewan, you know that they kind of meet out in the center, by the railroad tracks. And so they kind of set it up like a Wild West shootout. Didn't actually happen quite that way. And we know this because of the court case. And we've got the court case transcripts. And so all the witnesses talked about where everybody was when the gunfight started. So there was a guy that was a deputy for Hatfield, Ed Chambers. And his dad ran a hardware store. His dad was Reese Chambers. And that hardware store, by the way, is exactly where our first museum was, the original museum.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was the hardware store. So they were in the hardware store waiting for, there they are, Sid and Ed.
Yep.
So they were waiting in the hardware store, which was the back part of our museum.
Mm-hmm.
It was the other side that was the front back then.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Matewan now, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so it's that back, our little storage area. That was where they were at. That's where the gunfight started, like right at that door.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Sid is inside the door, and the mayor and Feltz are standing outside the door, like adjacent to one another, right? And they all pull out the warrants for one another's arrest. I think in your video you talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
Sid pulls out a warrant for their arrest, and they pull out a warrant for Sid and for Sid's arrest. They start arguing. Somebody fires a shot. Probably Feltz, almost certainly Feltz, who shoots the mayor in the stomach, and then off we go. Right. Guns start blazing. You have some newly appointed deputies. They appointed, I think, a dozen or so deputies that afternoon. And so you have a whole bunch of coal miners turned deputies that afternoon that were like on the roofs, and some of them that were around in the town. So guns start blazing. Feltz brothers get killed. And also Cunningham gets killed. He's one of the others that gets killed. 7 mine guards get killed, and 2 miners, and Cowboy Testerman, who dies later on that night.
The mayor.
Yeah. And I mentioned that about Feltz and Cunningham because it's I think it's appropriate. I can maybe it's or just some kind of fitting justice. They were the guys that were at the forefront of all these violent activities. You get Ludlow, and then at Paint Creek and Cabin Creek.
Well, they're child killers.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so they finally, their luck runs out in Matewan.
Yep.
And so they get killed. And, of course, this incident, it was originally called the Matewan Massacre. We usually refer to it as the Battle of Matewan. It was kind of called the massacre by the companies. and by the media.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, in order to make it sound like the miners just ambushed them and massacred everybody.
Makes sense.
And so
When they were just defending themselves.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah. So we don't really refer to it so much as I sometimes still refer to the Matewan Massacre just out of habit, because
That's what I named the video. That I did. So
yeah, well, that's what the historic sign says. In the town, the Matewan Massacre.
right.
Yeah.
That's interesting to think about, though. So, all right, Sid and Ed make it out. Does anything happen? Fast forward to Welch, or is that the next event?
No, Welch is not the next event. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before Welch.
Good to know.
So you go into like a second phase of the mine wars in all of this. Once again, tent colonies get established. The miners all go out on strike. McDowell County gets into this. You have Logan County miners. They're able to actually organize the northern part of Logan County all the way down to a little town called Blair. They get organized. And Blair, the town of Blair was kind of the dividing point between union and non-union. You go south of Blair, non-union. North of Blair was union.
Oh, wow. How are they still talking people into not doing it? Are they saying like, oh, they're corrupt, like the same things they say today? Or
no, you just couldn't get union organizers into those towns.
To speak to people. Got it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't just pick up the phone really and go,
right.
Hey,
Right. You can't have a group chat.
Got it.
At this point. But anyway, so they go out in their tent colonies. Mingo, of course, becomes known as Bloody Mingo after this. They do a lot of the same stuff that they were doing on Pink Creek and Cabin Creek. Keeney and Mooney. This is before this is before Martin Luther King. This is before Gandhi. This is before the idea of nonviolent resistance was really a thing. And their only idea was, well, let's get our guns. Let's get guns to these people and let's start, fighting back. The state creates the West Virginia State Police in order to put this strike down.
No way.
Yes.
That's how the state police was started?
The West Virginia State Police was created specifically to put down the labor unrest in these coal counties after World War I.
Wow. I mean, I have so many state trooper friends.
I do
it's
too.
Not their fault. That's crazy to think about, though. I didn't realize that.
Yes. And the state police play a big role in the events that take place right after this.
Right.
Okay. So state police are going to get brought in, a whole bunch of them. And by the way, the state police are going to basically do an attack on one of the tent colonies, the Lick Creek tent colonies, and they're going to attack several of these colonies. And they come in and they arrest a bunch of miners. They slash the tents. They take the food, confiscate the food, and then there were wells. They were using wells for their water, and they poured gasoline down all the wells to poison all the well water. This was just 2 months before the Battle of Blair Mountain that happens.
So they're starving people out.
Exactly. This is one of the big motivators to get people that the miners, when they were marching, the slogan was "On to Mingo." Like it was the Battle of Blair Mountain, but Blair Mountain wasn't where they were going. They were going to Mingo. Okay. And so they had to get through Logan County to get to Mingo. And the reason they were so desperate to get to Mingo is the state police had cut off the UMWA was sending food and sending supplies. The state police cut off those supplies, ripped up the tents and arrested all the men. And so you just have women and children that are living in these slashed up tent colonies with no food and no water.
Wow.
And so they're trying to get to them. So that's one of the big reasons.
So they're on a time limit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it ain't just like you hop in your car. It's like, this is going to take days.
Yes.
To get over.
There's a bunch of different shootouts. The biggest one takes place in May. And this is, again, Blair Mountain happens in August, late August. This is May. So it's very close to Blair Mountain. It's called the 3-Day Battle of the Tug. This is one of the most it's lesser known in the mine wars. Even a lot of people that know about the mine wars don't know about this. This was a 3-day battle that took on both sides of the Tug River, the West Virginia side and the Kentucky side of the river. And lasted for 3 days. It's estimated that over 100,000 shots were fired. Between 20 and 30 people were killed. And it was fought from Matewan all the way to Merrimack. So it was several miles of continuous fighting that happened for 3 days. The trains would not stop in Matewan. They just went straight on through, and they would tell people, everybody get down. They would all have to get down as they would speed up and try to go through the town. The miners would shoot up the trains as they were going through.
Because they were done. There were state police that like got pinned down underneath their cars for like 2 days and couldn't escape because every time they tried to raise up, gunshots would go off everywhere. And it was after this 3-day battle of the Tug that they go and raid the tent colonies. It was after that 3-day battle. Now, by the way, fast forward a little over 100 years, I get a phone call from the museum, and the state police academy, they had a new class of cadets, and they wanted to do something to where they get their class like a little up on the history, and they were like, hey, we want to take our whole class to the Mine Wars Museum. Would you mind talking to all the cadets and give them a little, take them around the town of Matewan and give them a little talk? And I'm like, how am I going to do this? So I'm there with like 50 state police cadets and like 3 or 4 state police officers sitting there right next to, and then I'm like, how am I going to tell this story? Sorry, first off, I love the state police, but let's get us some history.
Yeah. Because, I mean, it doesn't paint the state police in a very good light.
That's crazy.
What happened here. And what I did, by the way, is I talked about J.R. Brockus, who was one of the top state police guys, and some of the things that he was a really notorious guy. And then I talked about Sid Hatfield. And I was like, there's good cops and there's bad cops. Which one are you going to be?
Sure. I'd say most of them don't even know.
No.
They're like, yeah, because I mean, obviously they do a lot of great things. Back then, it's questionable. Just how it was started was nuts.
Yeah.
So did they do other things though besides that? Were they like, okay, well, a big portion is ending these strikes, but we're also going to have speeding tickets on these horses or, whatever.
Yeah. Get somebody for drunk driving on their horse.
Yeah.
Have a DUI check, somewhere. But no, what they did is early on, up until Blair Mountain, the entire state police force was sent into the strike zone. The entire police force. So they had, I think originally it was 50 state police, then they doubled it to 100. And so they didn't have all the state police barracks that were established throughout the state that you have today. So they were all sent to the strike zone, and then they all get sent to Blair Mountain to fight there.
Wow.
So yeah. So you have the 3-day Battle of the Tug. You have other gunfights that were going on. Sid Hatfield and Ed Chambers and a lot of the other guys. There was a big trial for Matewan, for the gunfight that took place at Matewan. They get acquitted. They all get found not guilty. The coal companies. By the way, that trial was a crazy thing too. It was held in Williamson, and there was almost like a giant battle there at the trial, because you had about 50 to 100 mine guards that were there, and a whole bunch, and like half the state police force, and they were worried, that the defendants might get all shot. So like tons of Union guys show up with their guns too, and so they're all like kind of facing off outside the trial.
Wow!
And eventually the judge has to order like everybody out of town. Because they're worried, that there's going to be, the whole town's going to get shot up for the trial. But anyway, Sid and Ed and all those other guys get found not guilty in the trial. Well, okay, so 3-day Battle of the Tug takes place in May.
Anyone die there?
Huh?
Anyone die?
Yeah,
there?
between 20 and 30.
Oh, okay.
Died in the 3-day Battle of the Tug. We don't know the exact number.
Okay.
So that had just happened. Then the police raid on the tent colonies took place after that in June. Okay. Then Hatfield and Chambers found out that they are being charged with aiding or abetting some violent incident that took place in McDowell County, and get summoned to Welch to be arraigned for a trial there. For I think it was smuggling guns or something like that. I forget the exact charge they were going to put on them.
Was it a setup?
Yeah.
Oh, it was? Okay.
It was to get them out of Mingo County. So they go there on August the 1st. They ask that Sid and Ed agree to come to the court unarmed. And so they agree to that.
Red flag.
Yeah. So they agree to that. And as they're they walk up the courthouse steps at Welch, the McDowell County courthouse steps, which of course are still there. I'm sure you've been there.
Beautiful place.
Yeah. They had some really pretty old courthouses. Mm-hmm. By the way, about a thing about courthouses, I should mention, I talked about all the land grabs. In the 2 decades after the Civil War, 9 West Virginia courthouses burnt down. All in places where the coal companies came and bought up a bunch of land.
Wow.
All those land records just up in smoke. Wasn't that convenient? But anyway,
crazy.
I digress. There's so many of these little
that's important, man.
Things that happen. So, August the 1st, 1921, they go to Welch. One of the detectives, the Baldwin Phillips detectives, had been a spy, and his name was C.E. Lively. And he had been a spy in Matewan, and everybody thought he was a Union guy. He had even participated in the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strike.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And somewhere along the line, he turned sides and becomes a plant.
Is this him?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Oh, hang on. Keep going. I'll bring it up.
And nobody knew, though, that he was a double agent for the Baldwin Felts until Sid Hatfield's trial. And he takes the witness stand and testifies against all of them. Well, now he's on the other side. Well, as Hatfield and Chambers with their wives, they're walking up the steps with their wives. Suddenly, Lively and a handful of Baldwin Felts guards step in front of the entrance and then gun them both down. Sally Chambers' grandson, Ed Chambers' wife, was Sally. And I interviewed her grandson a number of years back, and he was telling me what she had told him of that day. They just riddled them full of holes. And they just to make sure that they were both dead, went up to and shot both of them in the head. As the wives are right there, screaming and crying. One of them then grabs Sally and pulls out his gun and puts it up to her head. And this is according to Sally Chambers' grandson. Then the sheriff of McDowell County was there also watching the whole thing. The sheriff grabs the mine guard's arm and pulls the gun away and says, "No, the deal was the women weren't to be touched."
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they don't. So obviously the women survive. Nobody goes to prison for this, even though like half the town sees it. Nobody goes to jail for this. And now Sid Hatfield is dead. A couple days later, they hold his funeral. We've got a picture of his funeral, a famous picture in the museum. It's one of my favorite pictures because if you look at it, you can see the rage on everybody's faces. There it is. It's not a high resolution picture. We've got it really blown up.
You all blew it up really well at the museum.
Yeah.
The quality is great. But yeah, I got it here on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy on the right side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is legit from his funeral?
Yeah, that's from his funeral. They buried them both at the same. Of course, you can still go. people still put. I've been up to Hatfield's grave a number of times, which is just right across the river from the museum. And people,
Is it?
yeah,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
yeah, it's just on the other side of the river, on the Kentucky side. So go up there. You definitely got to check it out. It's got him and Ed Chambers and Cabell Testerman are all right up there, right beside each other.
On the Kentucky side?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to remember that.
Yeah, all of them are up there. People go and they leave like little bullet offerings at Sid Hatfield's grave, like spent bullets. They just take and just like kind of leave them there. It's kind of like, you know how some people put flowers, they put bullets. And you don't know who does it, but people just come and just kind of like leave that as kind of like tokens.
Is it in good shape?
Yes.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah. It's in very good shape. I try to sometimes do tours of Matewan for the museum whenever they hold special events. And if we have enough time, I like to take them up to the gravesite too and let them see it. It's still in great shape today. So they had this big funeral. Thousands of people show up for the funeral. 1 week later, after Sid and Ed are killed on August the 7th, 1921, Keeney and Mooney and Blizzard and Mother Jones all hold a big meeting in Charleston at the state capitol. Now, at the time, the state capitol was on Capitol Street in downtown. It's just not where it is today. You didn't have that wasn't built. It was on Capitol Street. And it was around 5,000 was roughly the number of miners that show up. A lot of them armed too. They surround the whole Capitol building, right? And they hold this big rally, and they have a list of demands that they want to send to the governor. Governor Ephraim Morgan is the guy who's governor at this time. So they have a list of demands. They want all the miners that have been just arrested by the state troops to be released. They want to be able to send, food and stuff to the women and children that are there. They want him to personally go down and investigate the mine guard system. They have this big list of, things that they want the governor to take action on. And I think this is really important because they don't immediately say we're going to shoot the whole place up. All right. They try to give this list of demands to the governor, and he refuses to meet with them. Won't even let them in his office. I have some personal experience with that too. But anyway, so Keeney comes back out to the crowd, and everybody makes speeches, but he comes out at this point and tells them his famous thing is, you have no recourse now except to fight. And he famously says, the only way you can get your rights is with a high-powered rifle. And then he tells the miners to go home and await the call to march. The day after, or actually not the day, that was on a Saturday, August the 7th. The Monday after that, on August the 9th, a letter goes out from the Union offices in Charleston, and it goes to Blair. And it's to the Union local in the town of Blair. And the letter says, in about 3 weeks, the Army is going to be there in Blair. There's going to be guns that are going to be sent down to you through what they call the Miners' Funeral Fund. That's in the letter. So be ready. And it's got instructions for them to wait on the miners' army that's going to be there. Now, they don't start assembling at Marmet for the march until it was around August the 24th, 23rd when they start assembling. Okay, so this is almost close to 3 weeks before they even start assembling. You've already got a letter from the Union offices saying, we're going to be in Blair. The guns are coming here. They already knew where they were going. Okay. The reason this is really important because there's this notion that it was like some kind of spontaneous uprising. No, they knew exactly where they were going well before the first miner started marching south. They knew where they were going, and they knew what they wanted to do. And so this was a highly organized affair. See, they almost had a march to Mingo County and Logan County in 1919. A lot of people don't know this. in August of 1919, because some of the guys they were sending into Logan County were getting killed. 5,000 miners show up at Marmet. It wasn't Marmet yet. It wasn't a town yet, but at where the town of Marmet is, which is just outside of Charleston.
Sure, yep.
And show up there and announce their intention to march south and take care of Don Chafin and then go on into Mingo County. The governor calls in Keeney and Mooney, who are conveniently in Fairmont at a union meeting at this time. They called everybody there, and then they went out of town. And when the governor sends them a telegram and says, there's a bunch of miners meeting at Marmet, and they're all armed, and they're going to march. We need you to get down here. Keeney and Mooney are like, what are you talking about? Miners? Getting what? We don't know. We don't know what you're talking about. We're in Fairmont. We don't know what's going on. They do this plausible deniability thing throughout this whole ordeal. So they come back. Okay, we'll come back and see what's going on. And so they go there and they're like, we don't know what's going on. I guess these miners, they just had enough. They're just, angry and all this stuff. And so the governor at the time was John J. Cornwell, and he goes with Keeney and Mooney, and they go to Marmet. And Keeney talks to them, and there's a reporter with them. His name was James Spivak, and he wrote a book about this that was published in the 50s, in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of other stuff in the book, but he spends like a month, like 2 or 3 months living in West Virginia, and so he writes about all this stuff. I think it's James Spivak.
Spivak. Gotcha.
Or if not, John Spivak. Or maybe it's Jack Spivak. Hold on, I'm losing.
That's okay. Keep it going. Yeah, I don't want to.
Anyway, he was there, and he writes about this in a book. And he's like, there were a couple of the miners that come up to Frank, and they act like they're arguing. But James was there, and he was there he had been following Keeney and Mooney around, and he writes in his book that it seemed really staged, like it didn't seem real. To him, like they weren't really. And then there was one point where they're kind of arguing back and forth, and Keeney's trying to tell him, you don't need to be violent and all this and stuff. And then he turns and looks back at the crowd and winks at him while he was talking to the governor. And anyway, they say, they say, Governor will, and Keeney's like, will you agree to personally investigate what's going on in these counties with the mine guard system and that if the miners agree to go home? And he's in front of them, and they're like, okay, I'll agree to do that if all you guys will go home. And then so Keeney tells them, okay, you can go home now. The whole thing was staged.
Right. And
after this, Spivak is meeting with Keeney and Mooney later that evening, and he was like, you guys are saying this is spontaneous. How did all the miners from all these different mines know to go to this one spot and meet up? And Mooney just turned to him and was like, there just must be a lot of telepathy in these hills. and then they have just both kind of grinned at him. And so they were orchestrating all this stuff from behind the scenes.
Right.
Something else really interesting happened within a couple months of that. A drunk Don Chafin comes stumbling into the union offices in Charleston one evening. And he's rather drunk. Nobody's in there but Bill Petrie, the vice president. And Chafin comes in. It's like, I'm going to arrest every last one of you SOBs, or says something along those lines. And they exchange words. And Chafin pulls his gun, and Petrie pulls his gun, and Petrie shoots him in the shoulder, knocks him back. But he had a small gun, not a Derringer, but one of these really tiny little guns. I forget which model. His bigger gun, his .38, was in his coat, and it was on a coat hanger. And he only had a little, I forget the name of the gun. I've talked to one of his family members that told me the specifics but that was in his desk drawer. And so he just had time to grab that and shoot that. But his big gun, his .38, Smith & Wesson, was in his coat jacket, which was on a coat hanger. And I was told that Bill Petrie, until his dying day, regretted that he didn't have his coat on, because if he had his 38 on, it would have killed him. But Chafin survives. He falls down. He's got a couple of people with him and that drag him off and take him to the hospital where he gets treated and survived. But anyway, that's just another little.
That's good to know.
Another little thing that was taking place. So there was nearly an attempted march. Chafin, who was sheriff at this time, believing that that march was going to happen, he begins to set up a bunch of defensive positions on Blair Mountain and on Spruce Fork Ridge, which is almost like a ridge line that's almost like a wall north of Logan, the town of Logan. And so it's this really series of ridge lines that stretches from Blair Mountain for about 12 miles. It's almost like a natural fortress. These ridge lines are. It's like, this is where you're going to defend if you're going to defend like an army coming in.
Sure.
So they start putting defensive entrenchment. This is 1919. Okay. So they already know 2 years ahead of time, if this ever happens again, we've got to go through this defensive perimeter. This is where the fight's going to take place. And so this is where we get the Hatfield scouting out places and getting that.
Okay. Yeah, that's how they knew ahead of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is important because what they tried to do at the Battle of Blair Mountain, it's called the Battle of Blair Mountain, but it was fought along about a 12-mile front. Okay, Blair Mountain was just the southeast end of that whole battlefield area, right? And what they tried to do was a pincer movement to attack the flanks, the northern section of the defensive lines, and then hit the southern section of the defensive lines and do like a pincer movement and roll them back on the flanks. You don't, by the way, and in order to do that, the whole army had to split into two big groups, right? And go to these two whole different places of the battlefield in order to launch their attacks, which would tell you that it must be fairly well organized if, they're splitting off like 8 miles before they even get to Blair to go to these respective places to launch their attacks. And they're organized into units with World War I veterans, on each of them. Of course, they're wearing the red bandanas, to mark their position as Union men. They have squad leaders. They have money coming in. They got guns being funneled in. They commandeer trains. They have food supplies that are being bought in. They have field hospitals that are being set up with a lot of miners' wives serving as nurses.
Wow.
So I mean, they were organized as a civilian army could be. They had a plan of attack. And that plan of attack was, put in place by the Union leadership, by Keeney and Mooney and Blizzard and Harold Houston, who was their attorney. I haven't mentioned him, but he was a really important guy too in all of this. They all make the plan on what was to happen and how they were going to try to attack it. So this was all laid out before anybody left Marmette.
Right.
So they didn't plan anything on the fly.
Okay.
And Blizzard was he's kind of called the Generalissimo of the miners' army. And that's correct because he was the guy that was supposed to be on with the army and kind of being the guy in control on the front lines. He was not one of the top, he was not a president or a vice president or secretary treasurer. Okay. And Keeney and Mooney or Petrie could not be at the front leading them because, as Houston, their attorney, explained to them, if one of them get caught, then the United Mine Workers as an organization can be tried for instigating a rebellion. Okay? Because they're elected union officials,
right,
organizing it. Blizzard was not officially, was not one of the district officials. So he wasn't known. And of course, because he and Keeney were so close, Blizzard could be the guy in the front lines that's kind of controlling things. Meanwhile, Mooney and Keeney were talking to reporters from all around the country who were coming in and going, we don't know what's going on. They're just had enough, and the miners are just going south, and we can't control them anymore. Once you push people too far, this is what happened.
Sure.
They'd already planned out everything that was going to happen in Charleston.
Yeah.
and the roles that everybody was going to play. Some because some earlier histories that were written about this don't have that whole part in it. Largely, but they had this idea that, okay, Kenny Mooney started to organize it, but then at the end, Blizzard just kind of stepped in and kind of became the impromptu leader.
Right.
No, he was designated to be the guy on the ground from the get-go. And the whole plan was set in motion and before they ever left Marmet.
Got it.
Okay, so they all start gathering at Marmet. Most, by the way, of the original group that lands at Marmet, almost all of them are Paint Creek, Cabin Creek guys, too. Veterans of Paint Creek and Cabin Creek.
So they got experience.
Yes.
Got it.
These are the guys that had fought before. Now they're going to go fight again. And so they're all gathering. Now, you're going to have miners from all over the state and even some miners from other states that are going to come. You even have some like railroad workers that come and even have some locals that join up, just like some local farmers. There's one famous local preacher, James Wilburn, in the community of Blair, a Baptist preacher who joins up. He famously said at the treason trials, it was time to lay down my Bible and pick up my rifle.
Oh, cool. That's great.
So
that's like the line in The Patriot where the preacher says a sheep must tend to its flock.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I don't want to rush through the battle. Can I go use the restroom real quick?
Yeah.
I
could do that as well.
Yeah. All right, and we're back. So we've all arrived at Blair Mountain.
Yeah.
So
getting into the Battle of Blair Mountain. Okay. So they're at Marmet.
Mm-hmm.
They're all gathering there. Mother Jones at this point has a really interesting change of heart. And she decides that this march is going to be disastrous for the United Mine Workers. And she thinks that it's going to end up being a slaughter. She thinks that the federal government is going to come down and they're just going to kill a bunch of people. So she decides she's going to try to talk the miners out of going. So she goes to Marmet and she claims to have a telegram that Warren G. Harding, President of the United States, had personally sent her, saying that he himself is going to personally intervene on their behalf if they agree to go home. Now, I sat down with Fred Barkey, who was a really prominent labor historian from West Virginia. He died a couple years ago. We now have the Fred Barkey archives in the Mine Wars Museum, by the way. And his father-in-law, though, fought at Blair Mountain and was there. Was there when Mother Jones had the telegram. And Kenny and Mooney show up because she went there and met with them without telling them that she was going. They find out, then they show up, and she's got this telegram. Mooney asked to see the telegram. Will you show it to us so we can read it? And she tells Mooney to go to hell. And so her and Kenny and Mooney get into this big argument right there in front of the miners. And she's saying that, I've got this telegram. Harding's going to intervene on your behalf. Well, it was a fake. It wasn't a real telegram. And Mooney went back to Charleston and sent a telegram to the White House asking, did you all send something to Mother Jones? And they're like, no, we didn't.
Oh, wow.
So she made that up. This caused, by the way, a big rift between her and Frank Keeney. They never got along then or spoke after this. And they were pretty close. I have a few pictures of them together. And how she used to talk and write about him in like these real affectionate terms, but not after this. They parted ways with one another. Well, the miners go right there. They're going to march now. As a lot of interesting things happen as they march. One of the interesting things, of course, they're wearing these red bandanas, right? That red bandana thing, The earliest documentation we have of that, or that I've ever seen, I should say, is from 1877. The first ever national strike in American history started in West Virginia. That's the 1877 railroad strike.
Oh, wow.
Started in Martinsburg, West Virginia. In fact, our new governor, Patrick Morrisey, when he gave his acceptance speech on election night, he did it from the railroad depot where that strike started. He doesn't mention that, by the way, in his, but that's on the national.
You think he realized it?
Yes.
You think he did?
Yeah, because he talks about it. I'm in this place. There's all kinds of history in this place. Railroads used to come through here. Civil War stuff happened here. This is where the coal that powered America got shipped out from the railroads. Doesn't mention the strike.
Gotcha.
At all. But it's from this strike that started in West Virginia. Again, it's funny how all these major stuff in labor history start in West Virginia.
Sure.
You know, the teacher's strike.
Yeah.
Started in West Virginia, and that spread all around. So this is a place where, you know, sparks. It's a place where sparks happen. I like to say that ignite fires that go across the country. It's a place that people don't pay attention to, but sparks happen here. Yep. And so some of the Irish workers start wearing red bandanas around their necks in this strike in Martinsburg. Were documented as doing this, and then coal miners take to doing it afterwards. And of course, then they begin to be called rednecks. Of course, now when they were called rednecks at this time, that meant you're a union man. Okay, if you say yeah, that's a redneck over there, that's a union. That's what it meant to be a union man. Okay, had no connection to our contemporary meaning of the word redneck.
Right.
Okay. And by the way, the word redneck has been used in a bunch of different places for different things, not just in America, but in other places, like in the Boer War in South Africa. They referred to a lot of the British soldiers as rednecks, for example. So, I mean, the term rednecks have been used for several different things. Some people have said the term redneck originated at Blair Mountain, but that's not exactly true. Okay, I just want to make sure. But
I've been one of those. I'm like, yeah, this is what happened, you know, not knowing anything what I'm talking about, but
that's okay. But it's where the term starts to get its modern connotation, okay, because of this. So they start wearing bandanas, and of course, in the media, the revolt is going to be portrayed as these backward, moonshining, inbred hillbillies who are just prone to violence, and it's too much moonshine. There was a New York Times editorial that said these people need to sober up and they need to get some soap. That's what needs to happen in West Virginia.
Right.
And when Hatfield died, there was no sympathy for when he and Ed Chambers were murdered. There was no sympathy for them in the national press. It was covered all over the national press, New York Times, all the New York papers, Washington, Pittsburgh, all the major papers covered it. No sympathy. It's a Hatfield in the same spot where the Hatfield-McCoy feud took place. This is just a gunslinger who got what was coming to him. You live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Right.
So that's what this was. It was just feuding hillbillies. And that's how it was portrayed in the national media. So, and this, of course, plays into the hands of the companies, too, because if the companies can say they're not doing this because they're being mistreated and all these other awful atrocities have happened, they're just a backward group of people, and the wrong people get in their ear and tell them the wrong things, and they're just ready to shoot the place up. Right? They're just being manipulated by outside agitators, by socialists. George Soros wasn't around for them to blame yet, but had he been, they would have said he's paying them, right. That kind of stuff. So it takes on this connotation of a redneck of being somebody that's backward, uncivilized, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and that's, of course, still with us today, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, some people try to take ownership of the term. I'm a redneck, redneck pride or whatever. But it's not the kind of pride that we were talking about back then.
Mhm.
They're talking about union pride, being a union man and supporting worker rights, which was really what the term redneck was originally all about.
Sure.
But they kind of stole that term from us.
Now it's like, I got my big Dodge and my pack of Zen.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
My, or whatever.
That's right. I got my Mountain Dew spit cup.
Hell yeah, son. Yeah.
My Mountain Dew bottle is my spit cup, and I'll throw that out the window and scream, "Get her done!" as I do it.
Whatever works.
Right.
That's right.
So, but I really wanted to mention that because this idea of West Virginia as being this backward place, really, it's the Hatfield-McCoy feud and the mine wars that really foster that idea.
Mhm.
Okay. So, and I bring that up to say, okay, they say they're behind the times. That's what they always say. We're behind the times here in West Virginia. We're a backward looking people, right? As the miners are marching south, remember, there's a lot of immigrant groups. There's a lot of black miners, and these are black men that are taking up guns in America in 1921. This is less than 90 days after the Tulsa massacre of 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, in which all those black people got killed.
Was that where they had the Black Wall Street?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they talk about it in that Watchmen series that HBO did a couple of years ago.
Mm. Oh, wow.
It's kind of like a sequel to the Watchmen graphic novel.
Sure, yeah.
But they talk a lot about the Tulsa massacre in that.
Wow. The good. I mean, that's kind of a thing that got lost too over time.
Yeah.
That you didn't really hear about.
Of course, it wasn't lost then. And for black men to take up arms within 90 days of that happening, that's a big deal. Anyway, though, they're marching south. As they go through each of the towns, they forcefully desegregate everything. They go into Danville, West Virginia. Of course, I've been to Danville many, many, many times over the course of my life.
Boone County.
Yeah, Boone County. They go into Danville, and they go into the restaurants, and they bring in all the blacks and all the immigrants, and they say, "You're going to serve us all together."
Heck yeah.
Okay. They even, in a place called Sharpless, it looks like Sharples.
Oh, yeah, that's what I call it. Yeah.
But if you go to Logan County, they're like Sharpless. And if you say Sharples, no, they're like, you're an outsider.
That's good to know that, like Appalachia.
Yeah. It's like an Appalachia thing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah. So Sharpless. And they go there. There's a company cafeteria there. In this little company town of Sharples. We have a monument there that's nearby there now, beside Clothier, which is next door to Sharples. Well, anyway, they have this company cafeteria, and they have separate rooms. For one room for black people to eat in, one room for the native white people to eat in, and another room for the immigrants to eat in. And the miners came through, and at gunpoint, they forced the company cooks to feed everybody in the same room.
Mm. Man, that's awesome.
Okay. And you got to think about that. It's 40 years before the Civil Rights Act gets passed. It's 30 years before Rosa Parks.
Oh, this was like the Wild West, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. Not quite, but
Yeah.
kind of.
But it's these rednecks,
Yeah.
these supposedly backward hillbillies, as far as race relations went, they were a generation ahead of their time.
Yep. Which you would think the opposite. If
Right.
you just assume, yeah.
Right. You assume, people from most parts of America assume that West Virginia is one of the more racist places. When I taught at WVU, I had a lot of football players and basketball players from out of state, that were my students. And they equated the word redneck with racist. If they're from like New York or New Jersey or Cleveland, their idea was a lot of them were afraid to go out of Morgantown. They were like afraid of Preston County, or afraid to go like out of town.
Sure.
They didn't know. They thought, they were under the impression that you might get lynched, you might get attacked. Yeah, they felt the same way. Like maybe somebody from Boone County might feel if they ended up in Compton, in L.A. or in the inner city in Baltimore.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
That kind of equivalency, the fear and mistrust that they had. And I would tell them, your idea of a redneck is this racist guy. Well, this is what rednecks really were. And that's really important, I think, for people to know that West Virginians weren't behind the times. We were ahead of the times, and they just portrayed us as behind the times.
Heck yeah, we were the first to back out of the Union for the Civil War, right?
Yeah,
we was on the right side,
right,
of things.
Right. We left and joined the Union, which, by the way, it really irks me when I see people in West Virginia having a rebel flag because of that.
Sure, yeah.
Because come on,
yeah,
I was like, come on,
yeah. That's one of my favorite things about West Virginia. To be honest, is the Civil War stuff.
Yeah,
that's just like that's who we are to me. So that's cool.
Yeah, well, we can have a Civil War talk.
Oh yeah, next time.
Next time.
Yeah, for sure.
So. Let's see where. I want to talk about that desegregation.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's not just a story about shooting the place up, but they were really ahead of their time, and that's one of the things we really want to do with the museum, and it's one thing I tried to do with my book, The Road to Blair Mountain, which is about how we saved the battlefield, is bring those stories to light that aren't in a lot of the other literature. Okay, so. They are marching south. By this time, the U.S. government is getting concerned. They send in a General H.H. Bandholtz, who was a brigadier general out of World War I, and they bring him into Charleston. He, by the way, is really famous in Hungary. He's really famous in Hungary. This
random.
After World War I, U.S. forces briefly were sent into the Austrian Empire to kind of like police things because the whole empire had collapsed, and they're making all these little countries. They're making Austria and Hungary and Yugoslavia do the Versailles Peace Treaty. Well, a bunch of looters tried to loot the big historical museum, the Hungarian Historical Museum in I believe it was Budapest. And Bandholtz was like alone for whatever reason. And on horseback, he like single-handedly fought off all the looters and kept them out of this museum.
Oh, wow.
And so they've got a big statue of him up there. And he's like a big hero in Hungary because he's like preserved their heritage or whatever.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, that's an aside. And he gets sent. He gets sent to West Virginia. He calls Keeney and Mooney out of their beds at 5 o'clock in the morning and meets with them in the governor's office and says, "Look, if you guys don't get these guys turned around, then the U.S. Army is coming down here, and it's going to be a bloodbath. You got to get them turned down." And while this is going on, you have Billy Mitchell. General Billy Mitchell, who was an early proponent and one of the founders of the Army Air Force before it was its separate branch. It was the Army Air Service, then the Army Air Force, and then it was its separate thing after World War II. He was a pilot in World War I. He was a real big proponent of air power and saying we need a branch of the military that's going to focus on air power. And so he brought in his biplanes and they parked over near the area where UC, the University of Charleston's campus is, which was cow pasture at that time, and landed their planes over there. And Billy Mitchell announced his intention, if things get out of hand, we're going to take the planes down there and bomb the miners and stop them.
That was a question I had. I always heard that it's the only time an airstrike was ordered on its own people. Is that true? Like, is that where that came from?
Yeah, ultimately they don't end up dropping any bombs. They do start flying a mission, and then they run into a storm and a couple of the planes crash. We've got a picture of one of the plane crashes, by the way, and they ultimately ended up turning back. But Don Chafin had a couple of planes, and so they sent a couple of planes out that did drop bombs. One of them landed on a schoolhouse where Bill Blizzard had a command post near Crooked Creek Gap. So they dropped kind of homemade bombs that they made.
Like pipe bombs.
Yeah. And most of them didn't explode. Only a few of them actually exploded. And other than hitting a couple of structures and doing some damage, they didn't do like that. We don't know of them actually killing people.
Gotcha.
Nonetheless.
So they weren't dropping missiles
Right.
in the hills. Okay.
Right.
Even still, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. So Billy Mitchell is there announcing his intention to use the Army Air Service and use these biplanes to take on the miners should things get out of hand. Bandholtz is there. Keeney and Mooney then go south to intercept the miners, which they do in Madison, which of course is just right beside Danville.
Mm-hmm.
They meet at a ballpark in Danville, baseball field. No media is allowed in. And to this day, we don't know the exact contents of the meeting. We know what it was reported that was said. Whenever they come out of the meeting, what is said is that Keeney tells everybody that they have to turn back and they have to, or otherwise the U.S. Army is going to come in. And then the miners agree to go home. And they start bringing trains in with intentions of bringing home. And then Keeney and Mooney and Blizzard go back to Charleston to tell Bandholtz that everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's the official story.
Right.
Okay. Now, I've heard many contradictory things from many different people about what actually happened in that meeting. Okay. But it looks like things are going to calm down, or at least the miners are acting like they're going to go home. Blizzard even takes Bandholtz out. Bandholtz is like, I've got to see this for sure. You've got to show me that miners are going home before I go home. So they take him to Racine in Boone County, which is right around Whitesville, about the halfway point between Charleston and Danville. If you take that route, which is where they went. And Blizzard takes him to some guys, a bunch of the guys in Racine. And at first, the guys at Racine, they see that it's a general, and they're like, "Are you General Pershing? Are you Blackjack Pershing?" He was the head of the American Expeditionary Force in World War I. They don't know who he is. Bandholtz says, but he tells them who he is, and he like banters back and forth with the coal miners, and they're like, yeah, we're going home, we're going to go home. And he comes back and he goes back to DC, and he basically reports to Harding that these are just good old boys. They they're angry and stuff, but it's calmed down. They're not like bad dudes. It's not like this. They're trying to like overthrow the government. They've just been mistreated, and they're going home, and hopefully, things will calm down. So he goes home back to DC, thinking that things have calmed down. While all that's going on, Chafin and the state police, Brockus, this guy, J.R. Brockus, and the state police, there's another guy. Oh, I can't believe I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, they all decide they're going to go into Sharpless. They're going to go over the hill, over Blair Mountain, and into Sharpless on the other side, the Union side, and make some arrests to kind of... there had been an incident in Sharpless that had happened earlier that month that the local miners drove out the state police and the mine guards all out of town, everything south of Blair. And they're like, this isn't your territory anymore. You stay out of our town. Like drove them out. Well, they wanted to kind of get back at that.
Right.
So they come into town late that evening with the intent on making a few arrests. And they start to arrest a couple of people, and a gunfight, of course, breaks out. And a few people get killed. Just a handful, but still nonetheless, people are getting killed. Well, that now... It doesn't matter what happened at the ballpark at this point, because now they're all like, we're going, So the march gets started immediately back up. Now, whether or not they were actually going to go home or whether they were just kind of feigning until Bandholtz made it back is very highly up to debate.
Right.
But they start. They branch off. They hit into Blair. And they wait until enough folks kind of get gathered up, and then they start making their advances, and the battle is on. The battle goes on for 4 days. Now, Keeney and Mooney, meanwhile, I want to talk about this for a minute. There's a lot of misconceptions about this.
Sure.
They get warrants issued for their arrest immediately. Okay. Now, Mooney wrote his autobiography, and this is where most people get this story. In his autobiography, he's like, well, Kenny and I decided we had Mooney in his autobiography sticks to what they used as their defense in the treason trials. And remember, he wrote this when he was still alive, and it was the 1940s. It was just like 20 years after the fact. And his line is still, we don't know what's going on. We didn't know, we were just trying to prevent bloodshed. We didn't have anything to do with it at all. And so he says, well, as soon as they issue warrants from our arrest, we decide to get the heck out of Dodge. So we go to Ohio and hide out there. And that's pretty much written in every story about the Battle of Blair Mountain. But I've heard a completely different story from Frank Keeney's children and Fred Mooney's children that I talked to. Okay, and one of which is when Frank Keeney died, he actually lived to be 88 years old. Pretty astonishing for that time period.
Oh yeah,
lived until 1970. Of course, he died before I was born. But at his funeral, like hundreds of old miners showed up at his funeral. My dad was there, my grandparents, and and all that. And a couple guys come up to them, and they were like, "We want you to know we were with." Keeney had told his children and grandchildren that he was actually at Blair Mountain with Mooney, that they were there when the fighting was going on. But that is completely different from the official story. Mm-hmm. And we were wondering, was he just saying that, or, was he just making that up? Or, we didn't know exactly. Well, then some of these miners were coming up to my dad at his funeral, and they were like, we were with him at Blair Mountain. And one guy came up to my dad and was like, I was his water boy at Blair Mountain. I was with him the whole time, and he was there, and Mooney was there the whole time. They just got out right before federal troops arrived. And so then they got smuggled out and went to Ohio. But according to Mooney's line in his autobiography, they were never anywhere near the battle. But they had to say that in order to get acquitted for treason and murder. And so he stuck with that line in his autobiography.
Right. So it wouldn't be evidence to the contrary.
Right.
Gotcha. That's cool.
So anyway, now, what all they were doing while they were there is still a bit of a mystery, but we've got several oral accounts of people saying they were there.
Cocaine? Or no? Okay. No cocaine there. That was only in Matewan. Got it.
Yeah. Only in Matewan.
Got it. Sorry.
They may have found some bud growing somewhere on the slopes of Blair.
That'll work.
Spruce Fork.
That'll work.
To help with the pain.
Oh Lord, I'm sorry.
No, you're all right. All right. So anyway, they try the pincer movement. There was also some fighting going on in the center of the line, but we don't know a lot about this. You see, the miners swore themselves to secrecy, and they wouldn't talk about the march for decades. Nobody would talk about it because they wanted to keep the leadership and the organization of it secret. And so they're all sworn to secrecy. People would not talk about this stuff. So a lot of people took this to their graves. And because of that, and because there's no strong written accounts of the fighting, if you're studying Gettysburg, you got soldiers writing letters home. You got generals that are writing up their orders. There's all kinds of written evidence about what happened. There's none of that with Blair Mountain, right? None of that with this battle. And the miners kept their mouths shut about what happened, didn't talk about it. So the middle of the whole battlefield, there was fighting going on, but we really don't know how much and what exactly was going on because there's no real accounts. This is why the archaeology is so important of preserving the battlefield, because you can go up there and you can map out, you can find all these spent bullets behind like this tree and this tree and this tree.
Y'all dug up guns and all kinds of things.
Yeah. So using that, you can map out where the fighting was the heaviest and how far the miners got. And so that's enabling us to get a clearer picture of what was happening there. But anyway, they nearly break through in the northern section at Crooked Creek Gap. They make a temporary breakthrough of the defensive lines, and you got state troopers there. You've got a lot of volunteers there. You got mine guards there, Chafin's men. You got the Baldwin Felts that are up there. And but you mentioned mentioning the bullets that we found. You really see what you see what the miners are up against when you see the bullets, because when you see the bullets that were fired from the top of the hill, the defenders, it's Tommy gun bullets, machine gun bullets, 30-06s, and then down here at the bottom where the miners are, it's hunting rifles, even some Civil War era, muzzle loaders. They're taking their hunting guns with them, and they're going up against Tommy guns and machine guns at the top of the hill.
Wow.
It's a really steep, these ridgelines are really steep too. You got to be there really to appreciate it.
With them being local, did they have an advantage there with the land, or they didn't have the higher ground, obviously?
Yeah.
So
when you're there and you go to where some of these actual defensive entrenchments were, and you look down those slopes, you're like, man, if you have a machine gun up here,
turkey shoot.
Yeah, nobody's taking that position unless they have artillery or unless they have the military discipline. And this is one of the reasons that they really don't make a decisive breakthrough, is that the vast majority of them are not trained soldiers, and if your officers tell you have to charge the hill in the military, you have to charge it. Well, a lot of the battle is miners trying to work their way up the hills from tree to tree, and try to slowly go up through there.
Yep.
But ultimately, they're unable to make a breakthrough before federal troops come in, and Harding ultimately sends federal troops. They arrive on the morning of the 5th day. The miners were about to make a big breakthrough too at Crooked Creek. They sent another 1,000 guys up there, and they were about to do another attack. And that's right when federal troops showed up.
National Guard?
These were actual federal troops. A lot of them, they came from Ohio. Some came from Jersey, and some came from Indiana. There's about I want to say around 2,000 troops were sent in.
How many miners estimated?
Between the standard line is 10,000, but I tend to think it's by the time the battle was coming to an end, I think it's between 15 and 20,000.
That's incredible.
And they controlled everything from Marmet to Blair. So they're not just at where the fighting is occurring. They're also controlling that whole area, the trains, the towns, everything, all the way down there. So they got a whole area that they're just controlling of the state.
So the troops roll in. How many are dead up to this point?
There's only the only actual recorded deaths that we have names of are about, I think 20.
20?
But the number is much higher than that because the miners they tended to bury their dead in secret. They didn't want the other side to know how many they were killing. And the Baldwin Felts did some of that too.
Wow.
There's the potential that there are people buried on the battlefield, on or around the battlefield.
Still?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. This place, the battlefield, some areas of the battlefield are so remote because it's so big. It's so big, the battlefield area, that only about 25% of the battlefield has been looked at by archaeologists. There's about 75% of it that's completely unexplored.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So how regularly are archaeologists up there kind of spelunking, and do they give stuff to the museum, or
most of the stuff that's been taken out is in the museum now. There was Kenny King, this local guy from Logan County. His grandfather fought at the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1991. He just decided, I wonder if there's some stuff up there. And so he just took a metal detector and started going up there, and then ding, 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 ding,
wow.
ding, ding, ding. Wow, there's just bullets everywhere. So he's the first one to really go up there and start doing work. He was an amateur, but if not for him, it would never got on the National Register. And quite honestly, if not for all the stuff that he's found, we wouldn't even have a museum because a lot of the stuff, the guns that he found, the bullets that he found, all the stuff that he found, he even found a Coke bottle. Well, it's one of my favorite things. We had a Coke bottle from 1921 that's still full and unopened that was found on Blair Mountain.
It definitely has cocaine in it. We should chug that. I bet it tastes like garbage.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I was, I remember the first time looking at it, I'm kind of like, I want to crack this open so bad just to see what it would taste like.
Man, that's awesome. So they're kind of wrapping up. The troops roll in and the miners go home. What's next?
Okay, so the miners don't fire on federal troops. They just surrender to the federal troops without a fight. All these guys were veterans, and their beef wasn't with the U.S. military anyway. So they surrender. A lot of them turn in their guns and turn in their ammunition. There's a little bit of film footage of that has still survived. And I know we've got it at the museum. You see the miners like emptying their pockets out of bullets and all this.
Yeah. Y'all have video, a lot of cool videos. The one of Sid.
Yeah.
They call him Smiling Sid.
Yeah.
Let's see here.
That's a still frame from the video.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I got this on screen of a guy turning over his weapon. All right, there we go. So they start. Is that the Paint Creek and Cabin Creek was the first photo, right?
Yes.
Of all those guns. So they're doing the same thing here, taking everyone's guns.
Yeah, but we don't have any pictures of that. A lot of miners buried their guns too in places.
That's why you're finding guns. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of miners buried their guns. There is one really, speaking of the guns, I told you about Fred Barkey, about his father-in-law who fought at Blair Mountain. Years later, he's telling Fred these stories, and he opens up an old chest and he brings out his red bandana because he still had his red bandana from the march and his handgun that he had with him.
Wow.
And Fred Barkey was like, well, it's really cool that you kept these things for posterity, for history's sake, so that people know the story. And he said, that's not why I have it. I didn't keep that stuff for posterity. I kept this stuff in case the call ever comes again. So they're burying their guns, but they're not just doing it so that they don't get confiscated, but they're like, we may have to come back. There may be a time that we've got to come back. There might be another Blair Mountain at some point in the future.
Yeah.
So a lot of them, their charges brought up against Keeney, Mooney, Blizzard, Bill Petrie, and around 525 other miners are arrested, which is a small number considering the amount of people, but people scattered. They try to get what they think are the ringleaders. Keeney and Mooney and Petrie and Blizzard spend about 100 days in the Logan County Jail. Don Chafin would charge a dime. It was a dime or 15 cents for people to come up and heckle them. You could come up and heckle the prisoners.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when the lawyer that they got to represent them was a guy by the name of T.C. Townsend, who was also a former miner, and he took the train down to Logan to meet with Keeney. And when he gets there into the jail, there's the ledger that has all the prisoners listed and what they're incarcerated for.
Sure. And
it has next to all these names RN. And so he asked the policeman, what's RN? And the guy said, redneck. That's what it stands for.
Yeah.
Redneck.
I saw that quote on the wall. What was it? Kill all the rednecks you can?
Yeah. Kill all the rednecks you can. That's what Don Chafin said. By the way, the defenders wore white bandanas. A lot of people don't know that. So they wore white bandanas. And they did not call themselves rednecks. They were not the rednecks, too. So I think that's important. Yeah, kill all the rednecks you can. That's exactly what Chafin told his men. So they go to jail, and ultimately they get a change of venue. They want to do the trials in Logan County, but a lot of them get out on bail, and they move the trials to Jefferson County, all the way in the Eastern Panhandle to Charlestown. which of course is right next to Harper's Ferry. And it's the same courthouse where John Brown was tried for his raid in 1859, the famous John Brown's raid, where he was found guilty of treason and the whole Harper's
Civil
Ferry
War
thing.
battlefield up there too.
Yeah. That's, you're right next to Antietam is right nearby. You're not too far from where Gettysburg is in Pennsylvania. You've got all kinds of Civil Wars. It's a huge Civil War area. Anyway, the courthouse, so they had both of these treason trials in that same courthouse. We have, and another thing we have in the museum, they still had the bars from the holding cells from the treason trials at the courthouse, because the courthouse is on the National Register of Historic Places because of these trials. And but they're no longer in use. They were just in storage. And so when we found out about it, I was like, so do you mind like giving us some jail bars? And so they did.
Oh, those in there are legit?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, those are
That's
actual jail bars that held some of the miners that were on trial in Charlestown. We have more. We have enough for a whole cell and a bed that's in the back. We got no place to put it. We don't have enough room. And it's, my goodness, they're heavy.
Sure.
Full steel bars. It took, I think there was 8 of us that had to carry that thing off of a pickup, those things off of a pickup truck.
Wow.
In order to get them. That was, remember that day.
Your back does.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. My lower back remembers that day.
That's amazing.
So, they have the treason trials, and that's a whole saga in and of itself, just the trials. To influence potential jurors in Jefferson County, the Union sent a bunch of Union organizers into the county disguised as Bible salesmen. They would come in and knock on people's homes, selling Bibles. And this was, of course, in a day when people knocked on your door, you invited them into your home and like chatted with them. We don't really do that today.
Sure.
You would never, people oftentimes would not just let a stranger come into their homes, but there was a different time back then.
Yeah. When someone knocks, I look out the blinds and like, go away.
Yeah.
Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm very sociable. But yeah.
Yeah. So, they posed as Bible salesmen, and they would be like selling Bibles, and they would say, yeah, we were just down in Logan County trying to sell Bibles. And there's this awful guy named Don Chafin, threatened to beat up half of us, won't let us sell Bibles down in Logan County. He takes money from the coal operators, like just talk, just kind of like throwing that stuff in. There's all kinds of other little bits of corruption and things that were going on with those trials. But ultimately, Bill Blizzard is the first big trial that they go after, but he gets acquitted, gets found not guilty. They couldn't find anybody to testify to say that they saw Blizzard there giving orders to folks at Blair Mountain. That was the whole thing. They were trying to get witnesses and trying to get people to say that, you saw Blizzard there.
Sure.
They tried to do the same thing with Keeney and Mooney, and nobody broke. There were 2 guys, but there was another union organizer, Walter Allen, that they tried after Blizzard, and they got a conviction from because they got 2 miners to turn to testify against him.
Oh, man.
Though I don't remember their names, but those 2 miners were set to testify against Keeney and Mooney too. But they never made it to trial. Those guys, they hid them out in Ohio, but they both got murdered before Keeney and Mooney came to trial.
Yeah, the old snitches get ditches defense or whatever.
Yeah, snitches get buried in ditches.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Gotcha.
So, yeah, they get killed. Walter Allen, the guy that does get convicted, he skips bail and is never seen again. So he doesn't go to jail. He just disappears. Nobody knows what happened to him to this day.
Wow.
But he just disappeared.
Yeah.
They smuggled him somewhere.
Wow.
So the trials stretch out until 1924 because there's a whole big series of them. They finally end in 1924, and 2 weeks after they end, Lewis forces Keeney and Mooney to resign. He was not happy with the march on Blair Mountain and with the battle. He was not consulted. They didn't talk to him. They just did it on their own authority. and he didn't like that. He also was a little bit threatened by Keeney and Mooney's influence in the Union, and so he forces them to resign. And so they resign, and things go really downhill in West Virginia for the rest of the 1920s. There's 50,000 Union miners when Keeney and Mooney resign. 5 years later, when the stock market crashes, there's less than 1,000 Union members in West Virginia.
No way.
Yeah, less than 1,000. That's also the decade of the 1920s after Blair Mountain was the deadliest decade to be a coal miner in West Virginia history. Over 400 deaths per year in the mines, which is by decade, that's by far the deadliest decade to be a coal miner. But there was no union mines. And so the companies can do whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. Keeney, of course, during the Depression in 1930, he starts up his own union since he'd been kicked out of the UMWA, and the UMWA didn't have any presence. So he starts up the West Virginia Mine Workers. 30,000 miners join his union in the first couple of weeks.
How do you get the word out back then? Like, hey, here's this newsletter.
Yeah, they had pamphlets that they gave out. I have copies of some of them.
Oh, cool.
Pamphlets that they put out. Keeney just, went back into, the coal camps, on a truck. He would, and they would stop the truck. He would get in the bed of the truck and make a speech, and then they go on to the next place. They all knew him too.
Sure.
And Mooney, of course, joined up with him. Blizzard did not, though. Blizzard decided to stick with the UMWA. But anyway, Keeney's union only lasts until 1933, when the National Industrial Recovery Act was passed. Section 7A of that act gave workers the right to organize and bargain collectively.
Yes,
to join
sir.
unions. Now, that's act going to get replaced by the Wagner Act in 1935, but the act in 1933 made all the difference in West Virginia. Within a month, everybody's joining the UMWA. And Keeney disbanded his union and told the miners, "You go back into the UMWA." But he was ostracized from the United Mine Workers after this because he was a traitor because he started up his own union and was kind of disgraced from that and kind of spent the rest of his life outside of the union after that. So,
do they recognize him today?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They do today. Cecil Roberts, I have a good relationship with him, and we built up in the efforts to save the Blair Mountain battlefield. And so, yes, that's great. His reputation has been kind of, I guess, improved greatly.
Good deal.
Since those times. So after that, right? Okay, so you think, okay, things are unionized, and so that continues. The union remained strong in West Virginia until the 80s, mid-80s, and early 90s, and takes a downward turn after that. But the big thing is...
Big strike in the 70s, or was it the 80s?
There were a lot of big strikes, of course, but the big ones, there was a big Massey strike in the 80s, 85. Don Blankenship, comes into the forefront at that time.
He kept a TV where it had a bullet hole in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. He came 1 week after we opened up the museum. He came to the museum.
Did he really?
Yeah, I was there.
Did you talk to him?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had a long conversation.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
He walked into the museum. First of all, he pulled up in it was like a 67 Bel Air convertible, baby blue. Gorgeous old classic car.
Right.
I noticed the car before I noticed him. I was like, what? I don't see that around here. Just amazing classic car. Pulls up and then he gets out. It's like, is that Don Blankenship? I was there. We'd had our grand opening the week before. So it's 10 years ago. We had the grand opening the week before, and it was the following Saturday. And the time we were only open we were only open 2 days a week when we first started up. And we had our first staff member, Elijah, who was a former student of mine, and he was going to just be the front door person, and kind of run the desk. And so I came with him his first day just to be there so he wouldn't be there by himself.
Sure.
And so it's just me and him sitting in there. And it's early on in the day as soon as we open. And sure enough, John Blankenship walks in. He took his phone out and he took a picture of every single thing in that museum.
To document, you think? Or
He brought his phone out, and of all the little labels, that had the story,
right.
He took pictures of every single one. Every single one. He spent over an hour. And the museum was tiny at that point in time, the original.
The first building?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, where Chambers Hardware store was.
Sure. Yeah, I did a 4-hour audio project on UBB. I tried to get him on. Didn't work. But which I don't know if he's listened to it, but it don't necessarily paint him in a good light, but
sure,
I tried to do it in a non-biased way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so many people are upset, rightfully so, over that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. He just roll up and which he seems cordial. Like he seems like you can talk to him.
Oh, they're not. They're not rude to you.
Right.
In the process of trying to save the battlefield, I went into meetings with Bill Rainey, the head of the West Virginia Coal Association, and a number of other big time coal operators in West Virginia. Met with them in rooms that lasted for hours, and so I got to meet all these guys and look them in the eyes and see what they were, who they were and what they were up to. No, they come in and they're polite, and then but I mean, of course it got rough in some of the meetings, but
sure.
But they're at first, kind of cordial, and they don't necessarily have horns coming out of their heads.
Right. That's what you imagine, because you hear all these things, but at the same time, it matters what you do behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Too.
After Blankenship looked through everything, I just kind of waited. I was just kind of sitting there watching him go through everything. So he came up to me and he knew my name. He knew who I was. And he was like, "You did a good job writing all that stuff, Chuck." And I was like, "How do you know I wrote it?" He was like, "Oh, well, I just kind of figured it was you that did the writing." I didn't say. I did a ton of interviews when that museum opened up. I never said that I wrote all the stuff.
Sure.
In any of the interviews, I'm like, "Oh, how do you know I wrote all this stuff?" He knew a ton of stuff about me that I didn't think he should know.
Right.
For whatever reason, but when we were trying to save the battlefield, though, and that's a whole nother saga, because the history got taken out of the books, right?
Right.
Out of the history books, and I could talk a whole lot about that.
Sure. I mean, I think it's important. Like, eventually, there was an effort to remove this history. Why was that? Why was it not included?
Yeah. So, during the Great Depression, the Works Progress Administration, one of those many agencies that Franklin Roosevelt created during the Great Depression, we call them the alphabet soup of agencies that Roosevelt, the CCC, the PWA, the WPA, FERA, the FDIC, all these different stuff that he created. Well, the WPA, they put out this project where each state was going to write a history of the state to use in their schools as a textbook. Okay, so you can teach state history. Well, the first version of the state textbook for West Virginia has all this stuff in it. It has the mine wars, has Blair Mountain, and has Mother Jones. Well, the governor at the time, was it Herman Guy Kump? I believe it was Kump. The governor, I have all of this in my book. I don't know why I can't think of it right now, but a
lot of info in there, Chuck.
No, I'm going through a lot of stuff today. So Kump, Herman Guy Kump.
This guy?
Yeah.
All right.
He sends they send a letter. One of their guys sends a letter back to the Roosevelt administration saying, "You can't put this stuff in our book. And if you do, we're not going to cooperate with any federal New Deal initiatives." Like all the relief, they were trying to. We're not gonna cooperate with any of that. We're not gonna cooperate with any of your New Deal stuff if you don't make these specific changes to the book. We've got that letter. It's in the museum. Okay?
Oh, cool.
You can go and read the specific things that take Mother Jones out of this, take Blair Mountain out of this, and take the Hawk's Nest disaster out.
That one was. I just learned of that last year, and that blew my mind. I didn't even know.
Biggest industrial disaster in U.S. history.
Yeah.
Right here
next door.
In Fayette County.
Yep.
Yeah. A lot of people don't even know. They go to Hawk's Nest, don't even know that there's all these mass graves there of these hundreds of workers.
Yep.
Mostly black.
Yep. Estimated upwards of 700. I can't remember.
Yeah. It's at least 700, like 760, something like that we at least know died. But they wanted all that stuff taken out, and they do. They end up taking all that stuff out. Then they start putting out West Virginia history textbooks. I have this all in the book. Phil Conley was the guy that wrote all the original textbooks, and he was a coal guy, and takes all that stuff out. The mine wars just are not in there. Nothing about the mine wars. You have to go all the way to the 1970s before it's mentioned in a West Virginia history book. And then it's just a paragraph.
It's like, oh yeah, this happened.
Yeah.
By the way.
And so we're dealing with this when we're trying to try to save the battlefield, because when they were, it was the initial guy. It was Blankenship himself. He was in charge of Massey Energy, but when Upper Big Branch happened, right? And it was Massey that originally had some of the coal mining permits that they were going to blast on Blair. Okay?
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, so when that protest happened, that was against Massey?
Well, it was right when, like a month and a half before our protest, Massey got bought out by Alpha Natural Resources.
Mm-hmm.
And Blankenship had to retire because of Upper Big Branch.
Yep.
Had it still been Massey and Blankenship still been in charge when we had that protest march, it would have been very different.
Yeah.
It would have been very different because he used hard tactics, not only against like protesters, but also against miners. So it would have been a very, very different scenario. So we kind of got lucky or fortuitous with that whole situation. But they wanted to blast the battlefield. Now, granted, there's about $200 million worth of coal. That was the appraised value in the permits below the battlefield. So, I mean, they did stand to lose a lot of money, but they wanted to erase the place where it happened. That's why they wanted to blast. Blankenship even made a deal with the National Guard to put a training facility and an airstrip on a part of the battlefield that they were going to blast off.
Mm-hmm.
They made a deal for this. This was right when Blair Mountain got put on the National Register, largely due to the efforts of Kenny King and an archaeologist named Harvard Ayers, who's unfortunately has passed on a couple of years ago. And they did a little archaeological study, and that was able to get it on the National Register of Historic Places. As soon as it got put on the National Register of Historic Places, Blankenship threatened to sue every member of the State Historic Preservation Office.
Man.
The coal companies then sued, and what they did, then they made this deal with the military. We've got the letters. I quote these letters in my book. We found the letters where they made this deal, and they made the deal while it was on the National Register. You can't do anything to it like that while it's on the register. Well, like 2 months after they made that deal, it gets taken off the National Register in part so that they can do this military base.
Mm-hmm.
We find this out after the 2011 protest march to save Blair Mountain that we all organized, and this was mind-blowing because it's now like, oh no, now we're not just up against the coal companies. We've got to deal with the military-industrial complex here too. I had to go meet with General James Hoyer.
They lose like $2 trillion and like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest corporation in the world, really.
Yeah. I had to go meet with General James Hoyer.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you remember, during the pandemic, he was head over a lot of the pandemic COVID responses and stuff.
Sure.
But anyway, I had to meet with him. He didn't make the deal. The deal was made by his predecessor, a guy by the name of Alan Tackett, General Alan Tackett.
I know that name. Yeah.
But we had to be like, why do you want to build a military base on the Blair Mountain battlefield? And he was like, what? On the Blair Mountain battlefield? And it was like, yeah, you all made this deal, and you want to make this, and anyway, that was a whole ordeal. We had to go through a situation where it got really hot there for a while. A state trooper threatened to shoot one of our members, Friends of Blair Mountain, Joe Stanley, at one of our site visits. Me and my lawyer and one of our other members, Mary Lynn Evans, we got our mail opened. Like my mail was getting opened. I would get it in the mail and it would be slits at the end where it had been opened. I would take pictures of it and put it online whenever it happened. We would get followed around by sometimes police. When I would drive from Charleston to Logan, sometimes a state trooper would be waiting for me at Danville, and they would get behind me and they would follow me all the way to my parking spot in Logan at Southern, at the college there.
Really?
They wouldn't pull me over. They wouldn't pull me over. They would just get right behind me. And if you've driven 119 Corridor G, people fly on that road.
Hammer down. Coal trucks go 100.
Yeah, they fly on that road. Well, I would obviously I wouldn't go over the speed limit, so I would slow down to about 60 miles an hour. Cars are just, going by me. The state police car would get in right behind me and just stay there, right behind me the whole time, and just do that. And I wasn't the only one. There was other members of our organization that was getting the same treatment. And we were getting our mail opened. I got my computer got hacked 6 times. My phone got hacked. I took my computer. It was my my college issued computer that was for my job. I took it to the technicians at our school, and they're like, "You're being monitored on this computer. We don't know who, but you're being monitored, and we can't really do anything about it."
Was he getting paranoid? He's
it was a really stressful time.
Yeah.
This was 2011 through 2014 when this stuff was really, because we found out about the National Guard base. We took them to court. We went to the West Virginia Surface Mine Board to get that stopped because they were going to build a 7,000-foot runway that went right over the battlefield. And we had to go before the West Virginia Surface Mine Board. In order to get a ruling, we had to win a unanimous decision. We didn't have a lawyer. We couldn't find anybody to represent us. We didn't have any money.
Really?
Yeah. We finally found a lady named Mary Ann Mall, an attorney who's not from West Virginia, who agreed to represent us. She knew nothing about coal law, and she knew nothing about historic preservation law. Nothing about that. And she just agreed to represent us pro bono, just do us for no money because we didn't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
I met with her. We went to the law library and we went through a bunch of books and found the different laws and found the stuff and put together. Our group met together. And we put together a strategy and we went. This was in 2013 and we won at a unanimous court. And that was against the state and against Jackson Kelly, who was, if you don't know anything about Charleston, Jackson Kelly, they're in the Laidley Tower. They're maybe the most powerful law firm in the state. They always represent the coal companies.
Sure, yeah.
If you're a miner and you want to get black lung benefits, it's Jackson Kelly that's going to go after you to try to keep you from getting your black lung benefits.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. Whenever there's a mining disaster, it's Jackson Kelly that defends the coal companies.
Really?
Yeah. We beat him, though. And ultimately, of course, we end up getting it back on the National Register through some federal suits and stuff. But it was really dicey. We were getting threats. At one point, the Coal Association, they had a call-in campaign to my college to get me fired. Yeah, it was pretty rough there for a while.
I mean, we got enough mining, can you just leave this one place alone?
Right.
It seemed like everyone could come together and be like, yeah, you're kind of right. This is pretty important, but it don't work like that.
Yeah. One of the coal operators said this to me in my face, and he just said, over my dead body, will there be a monument to the United Mine Workers of America on Blair Mountain?
Man, it's so, even today, it's so triggering for people. It's like, like for me, for instance, I appreciate coal so much, and what it did for me, it fed me for 9 years. Not many places I could have went dropping out of college,
right,
making 90 G's a year, But at the same time, we can also recognize like it eventually runs out. This is just common sense. And we can protect land too. You know, I think a lot of people misconstrue it as being anti-coal. Like, no, we're pro-worker.
Yeah,
is kind of what it is.
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's the Friends of Coal that really channeled that form of the debate. They you know how they got started, Friends of Coal?
I don't know a lot about it. I'd love to hear.
Okay, they started in 2002. What was happening is coal trucks were killing people. They were overloading coal trucks, and between 2000 and like mid 2001, there were a little over a dozen people that got killed by coal trucks. You know, they go around these, you know, the roads around here. They overload them, and they would overload them as much as 15,000 pounds higher than what the legal amount was. And so, you know, they can't take these curves when they're overloaded and everything. And so they'd hit cars and kill people. So it was a huge public outcry. And so there got to be a bill introduced to put much harsher regulations on these coal trucks. Well, the coal industry put another bill further forth to change the weight limit and raise it up. The weight limit was something like 80,000 pounds, and they wanted to raise it to 120,000 pounds. So that would just allow them to to put more coal on there. Wouldn't address the issue that people were getting killed. It would just make it to where they could get away with putting more coal on it. Well, that gave them a bad rep. So they go to this company called Charles Ryan and Associates.
Yep, I know them.
And they create a slogan and help them create the Friends of Coal. And the Friends of Coal came out right out of this whole coal truck controversy to give a positive spin on the coal industry. And then, of course, they immediately start making alliances with the sporting teams, you know, with WVU, with Marshall, have the Friends of Coal Bowl.
Black license plates. I wanted one.
Yeah. Those license plates, you know, all the bumper stickers and stuff that they would sell that you find on all the stores and everything.
Sure.
And, you know, if you're not well informed and you're just thinking, okay, Friend of Coal, that means you're friends of coal miners. That means you're supporting the families and the communities. You know, who wouldn't want to be a friend of coal, right?
Sure.
Right. It seems perfectly reasonable. Seems like a person, you know, but it's, I call it Appalachian bread and circuses. Bread and circuses was a policy they used in the Roman Empire to keep people. You can keep people under control if you keep them fed and keep them entertained.
Oh yeah.
That's bread and circuses. That's the gladiatorial games.
Sure.
You give them free bread and then you give them games to watch, and then the government can do whatever it wants. You can distract the people. So what does Friends of Coal do? They build little league parks, right? You see a lot of the coal companies, and they work with Friends of Coal to do this. You know. How do you criticize that?
It's great,
right? You're right. So, like, it deflects legitimate criticism because they can say, "Look, if it wasn't for us, you all wouldn't have this nice football field.
Sure.
If it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have the Friends of Coal Bowl. You wouldn't have, the Friends of Coal. They sponsor like the state basketball tournament, and like all the state cheerleading tournament. They're everywhere, right? And it's a really strong. It was a brilliant.
Charles Ryan did a great job on the campaign. Overall. For sure.
Yeah, you can't knock how effective it was.
Yeah.
But the Union, of course, was pretty much gone by 2000. You know, the United, there were hardly any Union mines left because they lost those big strikes in the 80s and 90s. The Massey strike, the Pittston strike after that. And so usually the Union would have been there to be kind of a counter voice, but there's no counter voice now. And so it's just the industry that kind of controls the narrative.
Why do you think that is? Like, is there potential corruption that kind of tainted the UMWA? Because eventually I know working in the mines, like when I worked for Massey and for Bluestone, two of the biggest places.
Yeah.
One was Union. At Coal Mountain, which they signed an MOU to not give us union time, which really sucked. But it is what it is. But I made the most money I ever made there, and then the other was Massey, which was 60 hours a week, 6 days a week, no days off. Like, this is how it is. And I made minuscule to what I made being a union worker. But I remember being at Massey and the talk being how anti-union all these workers were.
Mm-hmm.
And I was young. I never really understood what a union was.
Right.
I just always remember hearing that vibe. So I was just curious, like, why did it dwindle?
Okay, there's a handful of big reasons for this. One of the big reasons is, first of all, mine mechanization that takes place, after World War II. You have 100,000 coal miners in West Virginia at the end of World War II. 100,000. You can imagine 100,000 coal miners. That's why I'm sure you've seen old pictures of Welch, West Virginia from the 40s, where the town looks just booming.
Mini New York.
Right?
Yeah, they were, yep.
So by the time you get to the 1960s, you're down to a little over 50,000 miners. Okay, so the new mine mechanizations cut the workforce in half.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the 80s and 90s, you begin to have surface mining that becomes much more prominent. Well, you only need half the number of miners to do a surface mining operation than you do an underground miner operation, right?
That's what I did.
Yeah.
Yep.
You were underground?
I was surface.
Oh, you surface? Okay, yeah. And you can make good money, right? Because you just need a handful of guys, not a handful, but you need a very few amount of guys to be able to run these enormous mines.
Yeah,
right? Enormous machinery.
I drove a truck that could haul this house, and I listened to satellite radio, listened to Howard Stern all night, and dumped rock over a valley field 60 times a night.
Wow.
Like 48 hours a week, every week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slinging fat stacks. Hated my life. I mean, I loved my home life, but when I was home, I was so tired and depressed because I had to go back. It wasn't, I mean, I love the guys I work with, love the money, but I wasn't a good miner.
No.
It was just a creative brain in a cage.
Yeah. Yeah.
All night.
Yeah.
And hopefully your AC works. So,
but with that situation though, because they can use fewer, by the time you get to the 90s, you're down to 30,000 miners that are left from original workforce of 100,000 after World War II. So you got fewer miners. Fewer miners means the union's not going to be as powerful, first of all, because they're not going to have as many workers to really make a heyday. Because you can't, if you got 100,000 miners and you can tell them all to vote one way, boy, you can sway some elections. Now you only got 30,000. And not even all those are union, right? And so you can't really have the impact on elections that you used to be able to have. And now we're getting into the 90s. And guess what happens as we get into the 2000s? West Virginia makes a political shift, doesn't it? From blue to red. West Virginia going red in the 2000 presidential election changed American history. Those 5 electoral points that we were worth, we're only worth 4 now, but we were worth 5 in 2000. We went for Bush instead of Al Gore. We had gone Democrat solidly since the Great Depression. We even voted against Reagan once. We were one of the only 2 states to go against Reagan.
Sure.
If you can figure that. Well, anyway, but Bush's 5 electoral points, he won by 5 points, that 2000 election. He won by 5 points. West Virginia going blue to red.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. West Virginia going blue to red, making that change, put Bush in the White House, and then September the 11th happened instead of Al Gore. And I'm not saying Al Gore would have been some kind of FDR or anything like that. He really wasn't much of a candidate, but American history would be very different today. We would have never invaded Iraq if Al Gore would have been president.
Sure.
I'm sure we would have invaded Afghanistan, but we wouldn't have invaded Iraq if Gore had been there instead of Bush.
Yeah.
So that changed American history.
Yeah, which we usually don't talk politics, but I think this is a good conversation to have on why. Because I know when I was on a union mine, they would promote the Democratic candidate because Democrats are notoriously pro-union. But then the conflict would be also that miners I was around saw Democratic policies as being anti-coal.
Yeah.
So you're in this rock and a hard place thing.
Right. So you got fewer miners. The mines are more mechanized, and in the surface mines, like they can pay really good money, right? So it's a good job, at least a really good paying job, right? And I do not blame any 18-year-old who wanted to do something like that, right? I mean, why wouldn't you want to make $80,000, $90,000 a year?
Save my life.
And if you're in West Virginia making that kind of money, and that's like making $200,000 in New York, or $250,000 really in New York. So anyway,
I'd have been in my mom's basement.
Right. Gore, of course, was a big, climate change guy. He was one of the first American politicians to be really big about climate change, right? And so Bush came to West Virginia 8 times in the 2000 campaign. Gore never came to West Virginia. Democrats just assumed they had it in the bag because West Virginia always went blue. And Bush came 8 times, and they hammered home. If this Democrat gets elected, you're going to lose your jobs because he wants to go to renewable energy, and they're going to kill coal. And remember, and you don't have unions as a big voice anymore. And the Democratic Party in the 1990s, they really kind of abandoned unions. Clinton promoted NAFTA, and Clinton economically. And again, I don't want to get too political either.
No, yeah. People understand. They know. This is an important conversation.
I'm not trying to brainwash you, podcast world.
No. I mean, it's an important conversation.
Right.
Like this is a culture thing. It's not, I think it's important to talk about.
So the union that would have been there isn't there as that voice. And the labor unions, by the way, really opposed Clinton's policies. And like I said, Clinton economically was every bit as conservative as Reagan. A lot of people don't really realize that, but you look at his policies and look back, he really continued Ronald Reagan's economic policies. And that was to promote globalization, open up the global markets, which of course that leads to this manufacturing exit of the United States. And so they're no longer pushing unions. The Democratic Party wasn't pushing unions, and they really don't today. Like when the teacher strikes took place, what we call the mainstream media, which is left leaning, a lot of them, they hardly ever talked about these strikes.
Sure,
they don't promote that. You never heard Kamala Harris. You didn't say her saying a thing about unions.
Right.
No, not a word.
Yeah.
About labor unions. They don't talk, we need to reinvigorate the labor union. No. So it becomes the Democratic Party begins to embrace more environmental policies, right? And as they're doing that, you're pushing away blue collar workers who were once union guys. Now there's no unions, or at least they're severely diminished.
What is it? 5,000? 10,000 UMWA active members, or do you know?
It's probably less than that now.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's not many.
Yeah.
Almost all of their members are retired too.
Yeah.
Retired members, like the local 1440 in Matewan, they're all retired miners.
Gotcha.
So you have all of those different factors that are leading to this, shift. And the Democratic Party changes, and they really drop the ball. Now, you mentioned union corruption. There was a bit of that. The union's not like some kind of, it's not full of angels, right? And it's not like there's some kind of perfect organization. They had a lot of corruption in the 60s and 70s that really hurt them. A guy named Tony Boyle, who had a couple of people murdered, mafia style.
Is he the real charismatic dude? There was one guy that was like really good at speeches.
It was the guy that Boyle murdered, Yablonsky.
Okay.
Yablonsky. He was murdered. He was real charismatic, and he was his rival, and he got murdered. But one of the things that did, when Keeney got forced to resign, John L. Lewis suspended all local union elections. You couldn't vote for your state president anymore. They were all appointed. And Frank Keeney was the last one that was elected until Cecil Roberts comes along.
Wow.
It was the 1970s before there was ever any before elections came back. And it's the Yablonsky murders that kind of triggered all that and the Black Lung movement.
Which is a whole episode in itself.
Yeah. But the union shot itself in the foot, too, and a number of other things. If I just one more kind of...
Sure, no, go ahead.
I'm sure you know this growing up. Sometimes guys would go on little wildcat strikes just to go deer hunting.
Right.
They'd say, you pour your water out. That's what they say in the mines if they're going to go on a walkout, and they conveniently do it right when gun season starts for deer. And then they all come back 2 weeks later. Well, when you do stuff like that, you really cut into the legitimacy of the organization. And I'm not 100% blaming miners for doing that, but at the same time,
it's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not striking for the right reasons. And or you're not walking off the job they weren't really strikes, so to speak. They were just walk-offs. But that would happen like every year when I was growing up.
Mhm.
Certain mines would just close down during hunting season because union miners would just walk off and take advantage. But things like that hurts the union in the long run.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I only went to one arbitration, and they made a rule, the company did, that if you was 1 minute late, and it didn't matter if there was a car on fire in the road, it didn't matter what happened. If you was 1 minute late, you're going home. Well, a house fire happens, and this road, and I'm sure some of them are listening right now. I hope y'all comment and talk about this, but we had about 8 vehicles get stuck on this, house fire. And then we get there, pull up to the guard shack. I mean, you couldn't have wrote it better. The superintendent rolls in, sees us all. So we're like, what's he going to do now? We're testing him out. So one of our guys goes up. He's like, give me the word. And then he said, can't do it, chief. So we all had to go home. So we had to file a grievance and put him in arbitration. That's the only arbitration I was ever in. And we got done. We, was told the truth. Got up, was like, told them like there was nothing we could do. House fire. We had 8 witnesses, and then they ruled in our favor, and they had to pay us to be home.
Good.
So yeah. That's when unions are amazing.
Right.
And like I mentioned, it was most money I ever made. I had 100% insurance. They don't have that no more, I don't think. But back then, it was like 2011 ish. I had 100% insurance. I was making $26 an hour, overtime every week. I was 24, about 26 then. So you couldn't beat it.
Right.
But then, it kind of quickly after that, it kind of became more and more less of a thing.
All these issues that we're talking about right now, I discuss in a lot of depth in my book.
Yeah.
If I may shamelessly
Let's talk
plug
about
my
that.
book.
Yeah. Tell people the name of the book, where they can find it.
Yeah, it's The Road to Blair Mountain is the name of the book.
Bring it up here.
And it covers, obviously, I talk a whole lot about the history. There's a lot of the history that's in it, but this isn't a straight up history book of the mine wars per se. This is the story of how we saved the battlefield, like all the stuff that I just was telling you about, the National Guard base, the meetings with all the coal operators. And I go into depth with the decline of the UMWA and the political shift in West Virginia and how that occurs.
Yeah.
Friends of coal, how all that gets started up. Because I want people to understand like what we were up against. And you have to understand, in order to be successful, like, I wasn't a protester. I wasn't an activist. I never even had been to a protest when I helped organize the march on Blair Mountain. Okay.
Sure.
No experience whatsoever in all this. And I ended up getting thrust into a world mostly with environmental activists, which was a whole subculture in and of itself, by the way.
Yeah.
That's a whole different subculture. It was really weird for me, being a local, and then you have these kids that were coming in from out of state, and they're trying to like pick up a banjo and play hillbilly. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Man, that'd be a great podcast. Get like a old coal miner in here, and then, I think you'd be surprised at the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Get like an environmental activist who's never really even been around a coal mine, and then see what comes from that. But yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So, and I'm not trying to knock the environmentalists, although some of them were way too radical for me.
Sure.
There were a number of them that were like really into anarchism and anarchist theory, which I could do. I'm not. Let's just say it that way.
Sure.
I wouldn't even want to live in an anarchist world, even if it was successful.
Oh yeah, it just sounds stressful.
Yeah. But anyway, some of them were, they're like completely anti-capitalist, and they were like thinking, well, this could be like the beginning of like a big anarchist, and far left socialist movement in the mountains. And I'm like, why don't we just save the battlefield?
Yeah, let's start there.
Let's just do that. And then we can reshape society afterwards.
Sure.
And so what we did when I became president of Friends of Blair Mountain, I moved us away from an environmental agenda, which really ostracized us from the environmental groups that had helped us out in the protest march. I was not popular. I wasn't popular with either side for a few years.
Sure.
Like and the book, I'm critical of both the right and the left in this book for a number of different reasons.
That's how it should be. I mean, like everyone makes mistakes. We gotta, but anyway, I don't even know if that's possible to do anymore. But
it is. It's hard to have that just a reasonable, balanced conversation without people getting too
emotional.
Emotional one way or the other in these atmosphere. So we went with we're a historic preservation group, because if you talk to somebody in Logan County and say, I want to save this battlefield. First of all, I kept saying we got to use the word battlefield. Instead of save Blair Mountain, it's save the Blair Mountain battlefield. If you say save Blair Mountain, they're like, what are you, a hippie? If you say save Blair Mountain battlefield, they're like, oh yeah, sure. You got to save that.
It's so funny how words work.
Yeah. You got to save the battlefield. So it's like we get rid of this environmental talk, because a lot of these guys, they wanted to like end all mountaintop removal, stop all that. Mm-hmm. And when it's not like I was a big proponent of mountaintop removal, but it's like let's focus on this.
Sure. Yeah.
This. Mm-hmm. And if you just focus on the history, then everybody gets on board.
Yep.
They're like, sure, of course we should preserve this. Now the companies weren't on board, but if you're talking to coal miners and people in the area, yes, they're absolutely for preserving the history. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I have a big section of this book called Identity Reclamation, and that gets us into the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum. It's teach the history, okay? Teach the history. And the history itself, just that in and of itself, is going to let us reclaim the identity that we should have had our history not been distorted and covered up.
Yep.
So we can really know who we are. And so that's what it is to me.
Love it. All right. So I do have one last question.
All right.
How important was the events of the mine wars to labor today?
Okay. Just a little cat. Just cap it off with just a tiny little... Well, luckily, if you want to know, you can read my book. I do talk about its significance today. Here's a bunch of different things. I'll try to be as very, very brief as possible.
I'll go ahead. I mean,
a lot of places around the world are going through similar types of situations that people were 100 years ago in West Virginia. You think about all the different forced labor and really slave labor that is used to put these bad boys together.
Oh, yeah.
They have company towns in places like South Africa.
And he held up his cell phone for the audio crowd. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. They have cobalt mines, lithium mines, diamond mines, where they have company towns that people are boarded up. They can't leave. They have child labor. They're working under horrible conditions. And a lot of the issues that the miners fought about 100 years ago are right there in places that are, what we would call the third world or the developing world today. And so they have to have those fights in order for things to change. Because, when companies started leaving the United States and going to these other places where there's no labor laws, they can set up the same kind of systems that coal companies set up in West Virginia 100 years ago. So you have that stuff that's still going around today, but it's like so much out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
That you don't see it. And, that's why, manufacturing jobs were able to leave. If you had unions all over these places in these third world countries, they wouldn't be able to undercut the companies here, undersell them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they unionized, companies would naturally just come back to the United States because it would be simpler just to manufacture it here because they wouldn't have to ship it as far.
Man, that blows my mind. I've never have thought about the two, but literally they'll have to have their own Blair Mountain, their own history happen to get out. And even still, imagine having Blair Mountain now in today's technology.
Oh,
I mean, it would be horrendous.
Drones. You got drones that are going to be fighting, and if you've seen, I'm sure, some of the horrific stuff in Ukraine,
yep,
and watched some of that take place, it's really crazy.
Yeah,
but I always say Blair Mountain isn't about the way things were; it's about the way things are. And it shows for us West Virginians, of course, this is tied up into how the rest of the world sees us. Now, it doesn't matter if you're from Wheeling or if you're from the deepest holler in McDowell County, right?
Shout out.
As soon as you walk across the state lines, you're just a redneck to everybody else. As soon as you say West Virginia, it doesn't matter what part of the state you're from, you're in the same boat, right? And all of those misconceptions come from the world not knowing our story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why you tell the story. And the other reason is, of course, there are more Blair Mountains left to fight. And I also think that there were probably a lot of Blair Mountains that we don't know about that happened in our past. I bet there were Blair Mountains that took place in ancient Egypt, worker uprisings and stuff that took place in early civilizations that we just will never know about because the king in charge just didn't put that on the wall.
People died before they could find their version of Chuck Keeney.
I guess so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for all the hard work you've done on preserving this stuff. I mean, there's so much we wouldn't know without your work. I'm sure you spent, many nights, sleepless nights, with a notepad or however you do things. We just appreciate it.
Yeah. And I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of help from a lot of good folks at the museum and at Friends of Blair Mountain. So it was a collective effort, but I'm lucky to have lived through it and to have. My great grandfather fought the coal companies and beat them, at Pain Creek and Cabin Creek, and I was lucky enough to fight them and beat them here at Blair. We won round 2 of Blair Mountain.
Heck yeah, brother.
Yeah.
Well. Appreciate you. Y'all be sure to buy The Road to Blair Mountain on Amazon. Do you have an audiobook?
You can get it on Kindle. Unfortunately, it's not an audio. You can also get it through WVU Press.
Awesome. Be sure to do that and check out the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum in Matewan.
Absolutely.
It is a memorable experience to say the least. And everyone else, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia, and don't forget we are on Facebook, we're on TikTok, we are on Apple and Spotify. And if you're listening to the audio version and you enjoyed this, or you didn't, be sure to leave a review on your experience. Appreciate you all taking the time to listen. And everyone else, above all else, always remember, long live Appalachia.